This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. What shall we call them? I like the idea of a kind of what do you call it? A rhetorical comfort blanket. If you don't really like thinking about stuff too deeply, and I don't necessarily mean that as an insult, although I suspect that we're currently living in a period when the importance of thinking about stuff deeply is counterbalanced by the reluctance to do so because things are so bleak. But the comfort blankets, the little phrases that you hear people deploy, often people who should know better, in order to camouflage either their lack of understanding or their reluctance to have a proper think about stuff. We should train our own, for example, is a wonderful phrase to throw into a conversation about labour shortages and the ludicrous abolition of freedom of movement. And it often has a bit of a racist subtext, because how would you feel if you'd come here from somewhere else in order to work in our NHS and you turn on your radio and someone is saying, we should train our own. You are telling these people that they are unwelcome. But because you don't think about things too deeply, for me to be generous, I can say you probably don't realise how obnoxious you're being, how silly, how rude that you're being. And there's loads of them. We should make a list, actually. This isn't your starter for 10 on this Monday morning, but we should train. There's so many of these things that are comfort blankets, rhetorical comfort blankets. So they are actually comforting as long as you don't think about things too deeply. And we've all used them. I used to wrap myself in the rhetorical comfort blanket of, are you ready for this? If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. And hand on heart, if you've come to this programme relatively recently, you may find this hard to believe, but hand on heart, I really meant it. In fact, so long have I been doing this job that I can remember being unable to distinguish between emails and letters. I was talking about whether your boss or whether your employer should have access to your emails, or whether the authorities... it was during the post 9/11 period when our paranoia about terrorism was at its highest. And paranoia is not quite the right word. Never did me any harm is another one. Yes, you can send these in if you want, these rhetorical comfort blankets. I may even start making a list. Well played, Dan. But not paranoia, but also justified fear that there would be another July the 7th style attack on London, or another September the 11th style attack on New York. And you, of course, that list is long. And in that environment, I swang very hard towards a form of authoritarianism. I remember thinking that the question is all about what civil liberties you would be prepared to sacrifice upon the altar of your protection. There's a line that's supposed to be Voltaire, isn't there, about if you sacrifice any, you don't deserve any. I forget precisely what the line is, and with so many of these wonderful catchphrases, they turn out not to have been uttered by the bloke purported to have said them at all. But that idea that if a threat is great enough, then you will surrender some of your liberties. So I would argue back then that giving the authorities access to everybody's emails was a really good way of making sure that nobody was planning a terror attack. You can spot three problems with that theory already. Number one, if you knew that the authorities were accessing your email, you'd be unlikely to use it to plan a terror attack. Number two, as all readers of a certain type, a certain genre of thriller will know, you can actually use an email account if you've both got the password as a sort of dead drop, so you can read what someone else has written without it ever actually being transmitted across the ether. Don't at me on that if I've got the facts wrong. That's not the point of this conversation. And number three, of course, as soon as a caller said to me, and this is about 134 years ago, as soon as a caller said to me, should they be able to open our letters as well? Would you be willing to let them read everything you wrote? And this was at a time, this is how old I am, when sending letters was relatively commonplace, relatively normal. And of course, it felt very different to me. I wonder what age you have to be to find what I'm saying now unremarkable, as opposed to be in your 20s or perhaps your 30s and think, what the hell is wrong with this bloke? What do you mean the government should be able to read all your emails? I just felt they were different from letters. I'm of that generation where it all felt a little bit new and gimmicky. And therefore, questions of access and scrutiny would be different from how they would be on more traditional modes of communication. Bonkers, really. It couldn't happen here. I don't know if that counts as a comforting catchphrase, Claire. I mean, yeah, it probably does, actually. Except it's not comforting, is it? Because everybody knows that it's kind of shorthand for yes, it could. And when we come, as we do now, to facial recognition cameras, another area where the technology is still very live, still very evolving, we come to facial recognition cameras. Live facial recognition cameras, they're called, LFRs. And if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Right? If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. So what the plan is, and it's up and running in Croydon in South London, and a pilot project may be extended. Sorry, it's about to be up and running in Croydon, and it could then be extended across the capital. So come June or July, the faces of people on the high street will be monitored, and a database of alleged criminals, including rapists, burglars, and robbers, will be constantly running alongside the monitoring of the faces, and if they get a match, your collar will be felt. If somebody who is wanted with regard to rape, burglary or robbery, or alleged rape, burglary or robbery, then the technology will spot them on the streets of South London to begin with and allow the authorities to make an arrest. They'll be on lampposts. They might be attached to public buildings. They'll only operate when officers are nearby and ready to respond to any database matches, but they will be far more embedded than usual. So you won't have the vans that you can actually see from 20 yards away, can't you, or 30 yards away. And if you were on the run, or if you were trying to avoid the long arm of the law and you saw a live facial recognition camera van up ahead of you, I don't think a master criminal. You don't have to be Moriarty to turn on your heel or to swing a quick left and nip into Woolworths. Don't at me. I know Woolworths shut years ago, but it was the first shop that sprang to mind as somewhere you might pop for. W.H. Smith, Robert Dias, Pret a Manger, whatever you want. Whatever you takes your pick. And I'm really interested in the philosophy of this because I still suffer from a little bit of, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. But I live in a world now, and I hate to break it to you, don't shoot the messenger, so do you, where you can be deported from the United States of America for protesting solidarity with the Palestinian people. Or how long before somebody gets deported from America for having been rude about Donald Trump on social media? If you're in Turkey at the moment, they can close your Twitter account if you post footage of anti-government protests, a government that has, of course, just imprisoned its main rival. The lurch into dictatorial authoritarianism is underway all over the world. Trump has ushered in a new era. Benjamin Netanyahu locking up people or removing from post, I think, more pertinently, people who are actually investigating his own administration. The idea that you have nothing to fear, to me, feels more fragile than it has in almost all the time that we have had the pleasure of talking to each other in the morning. You've got nothing to fear. What if they started? I mean, remember when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary and she described people marching in solidarity with Palestinians as Hamas supporters? What if someone like that had enough power to criminalise peaceful oh, hang on, she did. So you could be unable to walk the streets of your country because you had protested against the government. But that all feels a little bit highfalutin, doesn't it? It still feels a little bit, to quote Claire in Rugby, it couldn't happen here. So what could happen here is serious criminals that have thus far eluded the authorities could be found and arrested. And that has to be a good thing. We have to have a recognition that technology will step into some of the space traditionally occupied by human beings, by bodies, and that has to be a good thing because it will be more reliable. I'm not sure you can bribe a camera, can you? I know you can bribe a camera operator, but I don't think you can bribe a camera, and a camera can't accidentally throw a suspect down the steps of a police station. So there are advantages to be had from this. But the tension seems to me to be between two not necessarily obvious rivals. On the one hand, pragmatism. The obvious advantage of being able to find criminals who are currently hiding or eluding the authorities. 0345 6060 973. And on the other hand, you have this fear that one day you could be criminalized for doing something that is not only legal now, but a valuable part of our democratic freedoms. Most obviously, I think, peaceful protest. And the idea that a future regime, a future dystopian regime, and remember, people like Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, are now reminding people almost daily that it was written as a warning, not as an exercise in fictional fantasy, as a genuine warning about things that are now happening in the United States. The technology would afford that those future dystopian authorities a reach into our lives that we could look back on and find unconscionable. And then there's the third leg of the stool, or the third side of the triangle, which is the almost natural resistance to technology, which only ever lasts for a little while. And fast forward 2 years and everybody goes, what were we worried about? That was perfectly normal. There'll be all sorts of things that have happened in the realms of technology and law and order that people had kittens about at the beginning, but which have subsequently become completely commonplace. And what is the difference between a camera and a well-trained police officer? Do you know what a super recognizer is? Have you come across super recognizers? These are people who can spot an individual. They look at gait sometimes. You've got gait experts as well. I read a lot of crime fiction. So you've got somebody who can spot me in a crowd of 1,000 people by the way that I walk, even if I'm wearing a Mr. Blobby hat on my head, even if I'm in a full face veil. They could spot me by the way. There's a unique imprint in the way that I walk. And so somebody on a camera looking for me in a crowd full of thousands of people would actually be able to spot me if I walk past the camera. That's not technology. That's just the camera. What about a Bobby standing on a street corner at a football game looking out for a well-known hooligan who's managed to get a ticket despite being banned from... Oh, there he is. You, mate. You're nicked. Put your trousers on. I'm mixing my metaphors there a bit. You shouldn't be attending football matches without your trousers on. So... what do you think? That's it. That's all I want from you for the first hour of the programme this morning. I want you to do some thinking. What do you think? I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you, but I'm always open about my low level. I don't want to say authoritarianism, but maybe that's the right word. I just don't like it. I do like the idea of the, quotes, authorities, end quotes, having more power to catch bad people. It only becomes problematic when you redefine what bad means. So what do you reckon? Good or bad? 2 years the programme has been running. That deploys vans. Hundreds of arrests have been made. What is not to like? Well, I'll tell you. Privacy campaigners described the move as a steady slide into a dystopian nightmare. Privacy campaigners can be wrong. It's almost a head versus heart one for me, this. So, except I'm not quite sure which way round it is. The image I have of myself is such that I think I would be opposed to this. And yet, when I crunch the numbers and when I look at the facts, I think that I'm in favour of it. Which way will my pendulum swing during the course of this hour? A quick call from Gareth, or rather a quick mention for Gareth, who's in Wigan. I've been a police officer for 30 years. I can 100% say that there will be mission creep. It will start with help to locate missing or vulnerable persons. Then it will be identifying potential witnesses, whether they want to help the police or not. And where it stops, nobody knows. You can't make me help you if I'm not if I'm not accused of a crime. It starts with rounding up people that are believed to have done bad things and examining whether or not they have. So again, I could be wrong, Gareth, and I'm surprised to find myself in this camp this morning. But I don't buy it. You find I'm a potential witness to a crime. You can't find me. You find me using a camera. I say I don't want to talk. I don't want to go to court. You can't force me to. So what harm has been done? So you unravel this one, and I think it's head and heart. It's thinking and feeling, and they both matter. If feelings didn't somehow and sometimes override thoughts, no one would ever get married. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I want to know how you feel about live facial recognition cameras arriving on a high street near you tomorrow. Do you welcome it? Do you condemn it? Fear it? or I don't know if there's much point ringing me if you're having a slice of wait-and-see pie this morning. I think you probably need to be for or against, but you also need to tell me why. Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. I probably should have established the accuracy of something I just said a moment ago before saying it a moment ago live on national radio. I love you, James, writes Neil. If you've got a bit of polite criticism, a word in your shell like, open it like Neil open. I love you, James, but... then I'm going to read it, right? I hate you, James, and probably not going to read it. I love you, James, but I'm going to read it. I'm pretty sure they can force you to testify. I guess that is slightly different from what I presumed. And yet there will be circumstances in which they can't force you to speak, can they? You can stick someone in the dock, stick someone in the witness box, and they just plead the fifth, to use an American phrase. Anyway, I don't know, but that's not the point. The question is this. Your High Street. Where is it? Where are you? Oxford Street. The Birmingham Road. I'm trying to think where you live. I don't know. Princes Street. Wherever it is. Tomorrow, live facial recognition cameras. What's the problem? Or why do you welcome them? Let's start with Joe, who's in Seattle in Washington. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I'm calling because I kind of have thoughts on two angles here, and one of them is that this is a thing that I think is a little bit more pervasive than we think it is. Now, this is something that isn't perhaps as live facial recognition as it may be happening there, but the sort of concern that we have here is, those Ring cameras that are sold by Amazon and whatever.
Yes.
Those cameras are, there's a portal for police officers to go and basically be able to request any footage from any time of day or whatever without the owner's knowledge or anything like that. That's all stored on the cloud. And that can also be passed through any facial recognition software that the police already have. So it's a really concerning thing for me. One of my neighbors in my apartment complex has one of these cameras.
Yeah.
And, if police are curious, they can just kind of tap into that and determine my comings and goings at any time in the past, couple of weeks or something.
And what are you up to, Joe, that you don't want them to know about?
I mean, I'm not up to anything, but especially with the conditions in the U.S. If I were to go to a protest that I don't like, the conditions of the administration, I would be nervous about, that sort of overreach.
I asked the question. And as you could tell, I giggled a bit because I thought it was funny. And yet, as soon as you say that, I said it myself in the introduction. I still, even now, watching what's happening in your country, even now, I think, come off it. Not in Seattle, maybe in Beijing, maybe in St. Petersburg, right. But not in Seattle. Do me a favor. And then, of course, they're already celebrating the deportation of completely innocent people. So how long? And he said, hasn't he, that even American citizens who vandalized Teslas, I saw at the weekend, could be deported. I know he can't legally do that at the minute, but the fact that the leader of the United States, the president of the United States, is even saying such things in public is yet another reminder of why anyone who says focus on what he does, not what he says, is an idiot. So you would. Are we sure about the technology? They can do a random... Well, the technology exists, so whether they can legally deploy it or not at the moment is moot. But they could just run through your Ring camera looking for people rather than looking for someone who they suspect has done something.
Yeah, it's very much a portal. Actually, you can probably find it yourself. It's not blocked away. You just have to present kind of your credentials as a police officer, where you just go and say, I have an emergency request for footage from this time to this time. Amazon, please give it to me. And, they can just kind of get it.
Because I'm looking for someone who broke into Dirty Gertie from number 30's house. But it is only the flick of a switch or a slight legislative shift where they could then use all of that footage alongside the software that the live facial recognition cameras use and just flash up people who you had no idea were in the area, but who are of interest to the authorities.
And in the U.S., it's not even a legislative thing. This is something that Amazon is doing voluntarily.
Really?
So they can, just decide whether or not they want to give over that data. The other thing that I wanted to mention on that point that you made was sort of the chilling effect of this kind of thing. Like, I've got a SpaceX office not too far from where I live. Okay. I've thought about going and protesting, but with all of the vandalism against Teslas and the idea that the president's put out there, I'm genuinely nervous. Is this really a safe thing for me to do? I don't know.
But would that be? So it is. It's a brilliant call, this, because distilling something I hadn't properly clarified, which is it's not actually doing anything new. You could have thousands of human beings on the streets with amazing powers of memory, memorizing the faces of anybody who turns up at these protests, but it's too big a project to be fearful of. And yet when it is crunched down to a few chips, a few processors, they can actually sift through millions and millions and millions of faces in pursuit of one or two. So although philosophically or technically you could do it without the technology, practically you couldn't, and that's what makes the technology frightening.
Right, and it's so much a concern of just, what is this going to be used for, not just today, but in the future, and if we accept this happening.
Then you can say that, I'm with you, Joe, until I'm not, if that doesn't sound silly, because you could say that about almost anything. You could say that about almost any technology. You could certainly say it about tasers. In the United States, you could say it about guns, armed police officers. I'm in favour of it in principle, but in practice it could be used... It could be used dodgily, or it could be used nefarious, or they could change the rules so that it can be used in a way that I do consider to be oppressive or dystopian. I wonder whether live facial recognition cameras are different from other technologies, or whether they just feel different because they're so new. Joe, thank you, and take care, mate. You remind us of the daily calculations that fans of democracy and freedom have to do in a country led by a man who is dedicated to opposing both of those things. John's in Slough, from Seattle to Slough. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning. Good to talk. Right, I was a policeman for 24 years. Retired now. I was recently assaulted in a very public place.
I'm sorry.
Mid-morning. No, it wasn't too bad. And I don't hold out a lot of hope for the police catching the bloke who did it, even though they supposedly have brilliant images of his face because, as I say, it was in a shop that was very well covered by its own CCTV.
Yeah.
In the middle of a town that's got loads of CCTV cameras everywhere, as most towns do, but I still don't hold out a lot of hope for it.
Well, because no one's looking for it.
Well, what I was told, that the last contact I had from the police was it's being passed to the town centre team for the place where it happened, because, quote, someone will know him.
Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, sometimes that happens, but with facial recognition, if this was something that was nationwide...
Yeah, I don't know, though, actually. I mean, again, I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds of what would happen and what could happen, because they are slightly different things. But this would be a database of alleged criminals. So if they don't know who it is, it ain't going to help you.
No, but if they have this chap's facial image from the CCTV...
No, but they won't, because he won't be on a database of alleged criminals. They'd have to know who he is.
Well, no, this happens all the time. Images are from CCTV, being just one, are shown on police briefings. And
without a name or pack drill. So, no, you're probably right, actually. I think it depends on the meaning of database. You could have a database of photographs. You don't have to have national insurance numbers and names alongside every picture. So they get a nice picture of the fellow that assaulted you. They run it through the machine. They get it onto the database. And then if he turns up in the environs of any of these live facial recognition cameras, he gets his collar felt.
Yeah, if there happened to be a police officer nearby, which is the next problem. But, it's another...
No, there will be one nearby. I'm in Mr. Pedantic today, but they're only going to deploy the cameras. They're only going to turn them on when there are officers in the vicinity. Otherwise, as you've just sort of happened upon, it would be pointless, wouldn't it? Because it would be going off every 5 minutes. There wouldn't be anybody there to do anything about it.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. But you could take that further and say, well, the cameras picked up this chap who assaulted you using a cash machine. Now, with the technology we've got, police could contact the bank or whoever operates that cash machine
and find him.
Know which guy. Technology is great, and I appreciate that under some regimes it could be used for illicit purposes, for wrong purposes.
Yeah, and how confident are we in just glossing over that, as you're about to do?
As I said to your producer, if I personally felt at any point the government made an absolutely... Well, they have made outrageous
Would you want
decisions.
Suella Braverman to have this sort of power?
No.
Well, there you go. There's your problem, which means your man gets away with assaulting you. Because I wouldn't want Suella Braverman 100 miles within 100 miles of this sort of technology, the way she speaks, even about police officers, John, who were on duty on Remembrance Sunday. I just wouldn't want her anywhere near it. And she was actually Home Secretary, incredible though that is, even now, to say out loud. 10:30 is the time. So do the fears of a theoretical... I really want to say that without the TH sound. I want to call it the fears of a theoretical future, because it just has a more alliterative... Can I do that, or does that sound really childish? Do the fears of a theoretical future outweigh the pragmatic policing priorities? Oh, get in. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This text, which has come into my phone as opposed to the studio, covers quite a lot of the ground that we're exploring together today. Facial recognition, really mixed feelings. I share your concerns, but where I live, there is now so much crime, particularly drugs and shoplifting, that it is genuinely blighting the lives of local, ordinary people. And it is a relatively small group of people doing it regularly. It's something which local police, shopkeepers and residents have discussed. This is an area where I live with historical issues with trust in the police and the state, but things have now got so bad that everyone is crying out for tougher measures on the high street. It feels like the Wild West, particularly for shop workers who live in fear. So if it could help, I'm now for it. But please don't read out my name. Why would that be? It couldn't possibly be because it's from a presenter on a so-called rival radio station, could it? No, that would be outrageous. But they make some powerful points, right? Desperate times call for desperate measures. Versus that Voltaire quote that is probably apocryphal, and I can't remember anyway, about sacrifice. He who sacrifices freedoms upon the altar of protection deserves something neither blah blah something nothing something. Dwayne's in Esher. Dwayne, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Good morning. I live as you know, in a rather affluent place in Surrey. And,
well, there must be. Esher must have some poor. There must be some poor parts of Esher. No, I mean, I don't. It's not just by dint of being in Esher.
Elmbridge, mate. I'm talking about Elmbridge, really. And in fact, I'm going to speak specifically about Cobham because there was recently a walk-in theft by three gentlemen of 10,000 quid's worth of a lady's handbag stock.
Yes,
and
in a shop.
The shop. Yeah, in a shop. And although the staff were terrified, obviously, the guys got out and ripped all the stuff off the counter and everything. Although the shop had loads of CCTV, it's obviously in the roof, so it's bad when the guys got scarves on and all that stuff. I would 100% support it on the high street because maybe they took their scarves off a little bit further down the road and they would have been able to be caught.
It's not CCTV, though. They'd have to have pictures of them on the system.
Well, I appreciate you've said that already, but I just want to go back one little step to the gentleman who called from America, because I used to live in America as well.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about the Amazon Ring security cameras, everybody bought those video cameras not so they could sit on the sofa and be lazy without opening the door.
Well, speak for yourself, Dwayne.
They bought them originally for security. The whole process of that. I have one, and I managed to find a delivery driver who put the boxes of his delivery on my car bonnet when I was out, and we may be drifting
a little from the from the central town. I mean, hey, don't get me wrong. No one likes a scratched bonnet, Dwayne. Stop talking over me when I'm trying to talk over you. No one likes a scratched bonnet, Dwayne. I feel your pain on that one. But and all of us are going to be thinking of a crime like that text I just read out. Well, they could have probably caught that person. I don't know that they would, because at the moment it's going to be quite serious criminals that are, burglary would count, wouldn't it, and robbery. But you don't worry about the
scratch bonnet.
Beyond the scratch bonnet, the idea that if you decided to go and protest against Surrey County Council or Elmbridge District Council, then somebody somewhere presses a button, and the next thing you know, in a theoretical future, you're getting your collar felt for breach of the peace.
But let's throw a very quick thing in here that unless you've opted out, any iPhone user is currently giving their entire contents of their phone to Apple, and they're not allowed to opt out. So that's your filming, your videos, your contents.
Yeah, but that's not, again. I mean, it's a bit of a departure from the central tension between thinking this will be a great way of catching criminals, which it will. I mean, in Croydon, they've caught 200 wanted criminals, including at least 2 rapists who would not otherwise have been caught. That is, fairly inarguable statistics, or that line at least is the point you have to come at if you've got a problem with the technology. They would not otherwise have been caught. So you have to tell me why you don't want, not Dwayne, anyone disagreeing with Dwayne, why you don't want these criminals to be arrested, why you think leaving them free is a price worth paying for whatever it is you're going to put in the other box with regards to dystopian futures or theoretical fears. Thank you, Dwayne. Matthew's in Leicester. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. I am very, very much for this, for the possible other benefits that this could have as well. I've got no concerns because ANPR, though it's different, that's already in place. This kind of technology is already in place in airports, so I've got no concerns with the technology itself. Think of the possibilities of being able to locate missing people if you have this technology in place.
Hang on, I mean, you're talking about people, unless they've got amnesia, who don't want to be located.
Completely disagree. I run care companies that specialise in very challenging young people that do have county line trafficking and flight risk involved. They would be fantastic to try and locate. Think about dear old Auntie Deirdre with dementia that goes wandering off. Individuals like that, it would be very, very helpful for their safety and well-being.
Is there nothing you can do in that field already? Is it not there already?
Short of putting a tracker on them, no.
Yeah.
Or you would require what's called a deprivation of liberty order, which would essentially mean that they're not allowed to leave.
So it would work with underage people or medically diagnosed people, because otherwise, unless you can arrest somebody, then there's not an awful lot you can do even when you found them.
I disagree. So at the moment, if someone is missing and they are classified as high risk, the police can look at cell site analysis for their mobile phones and use that to try and trace them. This would just be taking it one step further.
I mean, not quite like Dwayne, but it's not what we're talking about, is it? We're talking about giving the authorities the power to remove our ability to hide. And that applies to everybody, not just to people who are currently criminals. You'll be aware that they're locking people up at the border in the United States of America now for 2 weeks if they've got the wrong visa. They're deporting people who've done absolutely nothing wrong because Donald Trump doesn't like them. They're overruling judges and chucking people out of the country who they don't have the legal right to chuck out of the country. Now, if you were in that situation, you personally, Matthew, and you wanted to hide, would you still be in favour of technology that robs you of that freedom?
You and I are very fortunate we're not in that country, so I can't begin to put myself in those shoes.
I can. I would not want that technology to exist. If I was going to get arrested for protesting in solidarity with the Palestinian people, I was going to get arrested and deported for doing that. I wouldn't want the technology to exist. That's the problem, because that leaves me having to defend why I don't want the criminals you've just described to be arrested. But I do. It's just, I guess it's a calculation, isn't it? It's a utilitarian calculation. And you can't do it, as you just admitted, you can't do it if you have to imagine yourself being on the wrong side of it.
I think within that particular context, as I said, it's very difficult for me to try and do that. But
it's not really, is it? It's not really.
As a parent,
it's not. Well, no, hang on. You can't start speculating about what it's like to be one person with dementia wandering around the place, or a child that's caught up in county lines, but not imagine what it would be like to be another person.
Well, I can, because I'm
not going to let you. I'm going to demand that you imagine what it would be like to be facing arrest for peaceful protest.
James, stop interrupting me whilst I'm interrupting you.
No, I'm going to insist that you have to address this point, the peaceful protest point. And you can see it happening. It's happening in Turkey, a European Union country. It's happening in the United States of America, a historical ally. It could happen here.
One person's peaceful process is another person's blight. Look at what they were doing when they were gluing hands to roads and stopping ambulances and so on and so forth in the UK. They've made that illegal. That is now a crime in this country. Should they be arrested for it? They've broken the law. If they go into it knowing that they've broken the law, absolutely.
Do you know who else broke the law? The people who protected Anne Frank and her family. And do you know who upheld it? The people that marched them off to the death camps.
Didn't say I agreed with it.
Well, you kind of made an argument that the law's the law and the rest be damned, which doesn't work, which is why I use such an extreme example to point out where this leads. Where would facial recognition cameras have left people hiding from the Nazis? Where would facial recognition, live facial recognition technology have left people suspected of helping people hide from the... Just theoretical, always theoretical. But important, I think, to try to put yourself in the boots of people on the wrong side of it. But again, I'm not picking a fight with Matthew, because I can't sit here and say those rapists that they arrested in Croydon should have been allowed to go free because of some slightly undergraduate debating society point about Anne Frank's family. I can tell you, however, that it wasn't Voltaire. I knew it wasn't Voltaire. It was Benjamin Franklin who said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." That's exactly on the money, isn't it? I don't know that he's right, Benjamin Franklin, but the idea that today we give up some of our liberty, and you can give it up by doing what Matthew just did, saying, I don't think that would be me, or I can't imagine what that would be like. But you're giving it up, even if it's only notional liberty. Freedom of protest, freedom to glue yourself to a road. You had that freedom until relatively recently. They're locking up environmental protesters for planning protests now. But it's the law, so it's fine. It's not, is it? Some laws are not fine. But if you're going to sacrifice your liberty on the altar of temporary safety, it's possible you'll end up with neither. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's not yet 11 o'clock and it's the first show of the week. I have managed to get Voltaire mixed up with Benjamin Franklin, and I accidentally put Turkey in the European Union. You know why I do this? Just to make sure you're paying attention. And thankfully some of you are. A point of order, no less. Turkey's not in the EU. I got it briefly mixed up with Hungary, which is on a similar march, it would seem, to authoritarianism, if not dictatorship. And it's happening faster than it would have done if Donald Trump hadn't arrived in the White House and torn up almost all of the democratic norms that the Western world has taken for granted for years. So in those circumstances, how do we feel about technology such as live facial recognition cameras? This is, I think from Franz, this is a really good point that we have actually missed. Sometimes if you open a message saying, I think you're forgetting a big point, or you come on and say, I think you're forgetting a big point, my inner schoolboy bridles a bit. I think you're telling me off. I have to get over that. So it's a character defect. But on this occasion, I think he might be right. There are lots of positives to catching criminals. The only negatives I have heard are actually obsolete, because the type of people who would misuse the technology for bad don't care about legislation and laws. They would do so anyway. So if the technology exists, you can't uninvent it, can you? We sit here wringing our hands or clutching our pearls or having a fit of the vapours about what some theoretical future authority might do with this technology. Franz has arrived to tell us, what, well, you're wasting your time. This is actually a pointless contemplation, because if the technology exists, then some future theoretical ruler is going to deploy it in an unpleasant and a nefarious fashion anyway. Is that a real zinger that Franz has just brought to the conversation? So he says, why give up on the benefits to avoid something that's unavoidable? I'm glad we didn't read that at 10 o'clock this morning. I think it might have knocked the stuffing out of the entire phone in. So I'm sitting here going, oh yes, it's all very well that we're catching burglars in Croydon, and that is wonderful, but is the freedom of the burglar a price we pay in order to be sure that they won't use the same technology to lock up protesters? Well, they're going to lock up protesters anyway. They're going to use the technology. They're going to use whatever they can. We've got courts and laws in place, but parliaments can change laws. We've got courts in place. Well, Trump can... I like that, Franz, but I'm glad you didn't send it in earlier. And of course, you now have 8 minutes or 9 minutes to pick holes in Franz's argument that there's no such thing here. I love you, James. Thank you, Fergus. That's how, remember, if you want to criticise me, that's how you open the text. I love you, James, and I'm sorry to kick you while you're down. All right, mate, let's not get carried away. But you also said swang this morning instead of swung. This is true. But I'm not actually backtracking on that, because I think swang, whether it exists or not, is a better word than swung. Isn't it? Swang. It almost has a sort of twang. The swang twang. So no, I'm not. That's two admissions of epic failure before 11 o'clock. I can't go for 3. I'm not Ashley Hemmings. You know what Ashley Hemmings has done. He's only scored 2 hat-tricks in the last 3 games for Kidderminster Harriers. I'm not going to do a hat-trick of mistakes out of respect for Ashley's extraordinary That's 3 hat-tricks in one season for Kidderminster Harriers. 2 in the last 2 Saturdays, I think. Certainly in the last 3 or 4 games. Absolutely magnificent performance from the lad. Stuart's in Kuala Lumpur. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello, Stuart.
I lived in China for 2 years in Shanghai, which has a huge amount of, facial recognition technology, CCTV cameras, etc., etc.
Yes.
And
was that a sigh brought on by contemplating the issues under discussion?
Yeah.
Love it. That's what we want. We want more sound effects on that. Oh, no. Go on. Carry on, Stuart. I've got you. You're all right.
And I did feel safer there. There was an element of safety there, but I don't think it was the main reason why I did feel safe there. I now live in Kuala Lumpur, where, again, I do feel safe. There isn't really a threat of petty crime or being mugged or anything like that.
No.
And I think the real reason there is because of the sheer, not just police presence, but security presence as well. Huge amount of security guards, lots of, visible security presence there. So you do have an element, if anything, did go wrong or somebody...
But you get flogged. You get flogged for dropping chewing gum, don't you?
Well, no, you don't get.
Is that a slight exaggeration?
That's in Singapore, and you don't get flogged for that. No, you do get a fine of some sort, but no flogging. I think that's a bit of a...
Is there any flogging in Malaysia?
There is unfortunately still some flogging in Malaysia.
Yeah, this is how these conversations always go. And listen, this isn't a criticism of you, but it is a message that came in from Rob. Unless you've belonged to a group that has been policed based upon anything other than criminality, it's hard to object. But if you are a protester, a gay person, a person of faith, or you just want to have a quick intimate moment with a lover, this can completely take away your rights. And Emma puts it a little more pithily when they write... let me get this absolutely right. I can't put myself in their shoes. The unthinking privilege of the comfortable white dude.
That is a very, very good point. You do have to, take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah. Except that people like you and me don't generally have to take any rough at all. We just take the smooth. What is the situation on homosexuality in Malaysia at the moment?
It is illegal.
Yeah. I feel that I've unfairly treated you because you rang in to contribute to a conversation about live facial recognition cameras in South London. But, you did bring how safe you feel in Malaysia to the conversation.
The only thing, fair enough. I mean, if I could come into Malaysia and tell the Malaysians what to do, I would love to change it.
Sure.
I cannot be a person who comes into another country and then tells them, oh my gosh, you have to do this, you have to... That's not my position.
No, but you have used it as a rationale for why you feel safer. And I'm pointing out that that's quite a privileged position to be in under most authoritarian regimes.
I think to say, I'm hoping you're not saying this, but to say the government of Malaysia is an authoritarian regime, I would say is going a bit far. I would agree with you yesterday.
Unless you're gay.
But,
in which case, it's the bloody definition of an authoritarian regime, Stuart.
Is.
But again, I feel this is unfair. I feel you weren't expecting this. You weren't expecting the Spanish Inquisition when you rang in, were you?
What I would say to that though is it is slowly changing.
Okay.
There are sort of elements where you can see Malaysia and other countries, certainly in Southeast Asia, going a long way. They do have the issue of religion, which is a huge part in the
I'm going to finish you now. I apologise in advance because it's not what you rang in for. But if you were gay and the authorities were looking for you, you would not be in favour of facial recognition camera on the streets of Kuala Lumpur.
You probably wouldn't. I would.
Don't give me a probably about it. They're going to lock you up for falling in love or for having a relationship. So the privilege of the straight white dude, or at least the straight dude in this case. Thank you, Stuart. I hope that wasn't unfair. I think I did it with a modicum of charm. Jacqueline's in Fife, the Kingdom of Fife. Jacqueline, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
it's
Jack.
lovely to speak to you. I think there are enough ways to catch criminals not to justify facial recognition. From my own personal point of view, I left my first husband 45 years ago.
Yeah.
Because he hit me. He kicked me.
Right.
And I went into hiding. And to think that the facial recognition might be used to help him find me is downright scary. And generally, I feel it's just another knock at people's freedom.
Freedom to hide, really. Freedom of movement.
Freedom to be who you are, what you want to be, without thinking, Big Brother's watching.
What about Franz's point, which I think personally might actually knock the stuffing out of all of the feelings that you have and I share, which is that a bad person is going to use this technology anyway, whether or not they're a president or a corrupt police officer. You don't, so you can't uninvent the technology. No, you can't. But just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it for. And it doesn't mean you have to usher it in with a red carpet of respectability. I mean, there's technology we're not allowed to use that still exists, even though we're not allowed to use it.
There should be ways to track criminals once they've been in jail anyway.
A tag, I suppose, is most obvious, or some form of air tag. Your position is very specific, isn't it? And I think perhaps a perfect... I mean that in a good way, a perfect exposition of the importance of being able to hide. Yeah. And this compromises that ability.
Yeah, and as I said to the young lady who answered the phone to me, my first husband was in the RAF, and he was a crack shot at 1,000 yards. And every time I was in my house and I bent down lower than the window, I mean, bear in mind, I was 21.
Oh, you poor thing.
I used to think, well, that's another bullet I've missed.
Oh. And the necessity of being able to drop off the radar. I mean, oddly, the chap in Leicester making the opposite argument about the importance of using the technology to find people who we would all agree we want to find. But you make the point that some people don't want to be found, and this technology compromises their ability to stay hidden. It's all here today. Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm so sorry for what you went through. I want to squeeze in one more call because it looks particularly pertinent. Gersh is in Crouch End. Gersh, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I think this technology is incredibly dangerous and a real infringement on our right to privacy. And I think a lot of your callers have forgotten that there's a lot of bias associated with these AI recognition systems.
I think they probably don't know, as opposed to forgot. Although, I read that 35% mistake rate for a black woman compared to a 0.8% mistake rate for a white man. And I have to guard against my white privilege when I say something like, well, they'll sort that out before it goes mainstream, which is easy for me to say as a person with a 0.8% chance of being wrongly identified. So I'm turning into our friend from Kuala Lumpur on this. But you're absolutely right. There is an inbuilt racial bias because the technology is tested and honed on white people at the moment.
At the moment, correct, and it's trained by white people as well.
Yes.
And so I think also it's important to point out that most CCTV cameras aren't publicly owned; they're privately owned. And so I think it's something like it might be only 5% in the UK.
But this would be specific cameras that are out there. So the CCTV thing at the moment is a bit of a red herring. They will park a camera on a building and they'll have police officers nearby. And when the flag goes up, they'll go and grab the collar of the person that has set the alarm ringing. What's your personal connection to this story, Gersh?
So I think you had that text where there's no way we can opt out, there's no way we can defend ourselves from this technology. But I actually run a business, what's called an adversarial fashion business. So these are clothing patterns that are designed to confuse facial recognition systems. And so while we can't tick a box to opt out of something like we could online, you can wear garments so that you can opt out in public.
And does that? So I wear something around my neck and it obscures my face for technological purposes, or do I have to cover my face?
You don't have to cover your face, no.
Wow.
I mean, there's all sorts of... There are a few companies doing this, and there are all sorts of things you can do. There are hats, scarves, T-shirts, trousers. There's also certain makeup you can wear as well.
Does it worry you that you might be helping bad people to evade justice?
No. I mean...
Well, not even a little bit?
No, not even a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, there are lots of ways that we could reduce crime. One of the ways would be stopping and searching everybody, and I think none of us want that.
Yes.
This is the digital equivalent, I think, to stopping and searching everybody, or at least stopping and IDing everybody. And it's managed to get through the back door just because you're not physically interacting with somebody.
I know I'm in that mood today. I'm going to briefly push back on that and say it's better than stop and search, which can be completely random. But whereas this will only bring you to the attention of the authorities if you are suspected of having committed a crime.
Well, hold on. That distinction is correct, but it's no different to stopping and searching everybody. I know that's not possible, but hypothetically, it's no different than doing that.
Which brings us back to where the conversation started, with the relatively unsatisfactory rhetorical camouflage of if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Because, again, my white privilege kicks in, because if I was routinely stopped by the police and told to empty my pockets throughout my teenage years, I would have a very different relationship with the idea if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear than I do now. Adversarial fashion is something that I've been introduced to today. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Gersh. It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes after 11 is the time. I've got an idiot's corner. I'd missed it. I do apologise. So Tony got in touch during the last hour. He writes, James O'Brien getting hysterical and conspiratorial about facial recognition. Anybody? Point out the bits that were conspiratorial or indeed hysterical. Anyway, but unlocks his iPhone using the very same facial recognition technology. Ha-ha! Yeah, I mean, it's possible that two things could have absolutely nothing to do with each other, despite occupying vaguely similar territory on an even more violent scale than those two things, Tone. But I can't currently think of an example. Anyway, in you go. First of the week. Turn the heating on while you're in there. It's still not quite as warm as it looks from the window. 7 after 11 is the time. Okay, I've got a why for you. Only workers in the Philippines are more reluctant to go into the office than those in Britain. Of all the stories we've discussed together over the last few years, the working from home story, or the remote working story, is one of the ones where the language is the most skewed, isn't it? So straight away, reluctant to go into the office. It's a bad thing to be reluctant, right? Reluctant to go into the office. Read down into the second or third paragraph. Filipino workers are the most office shy. Office shy is like a cousin of work shy, right? It's a bad thing. We're supposed to dislike these people who are working from home. Everywhere you look at the story, no thanks, we're British. Only workers in the Philippines are more reluctant. There's everywhere. I didn't notice it at the time. But the rhetoric of home working, which accelerated at an extraordinary speed as a consequence of lockdowns, but which I think, well, I don't know actually. Would it have happened anyway? How many workplaces would have realised the efficiencies that could be adopted by, and the savings, crucially, that could be adopted by having a workforce working much, much more from home than previously? How visionary a boss would you have had to be to say 10 years ago, why do we even have an office? Do you remember that call we took? Like really early doors when the lockdowns had started, when workplaces had started shutting and everyone was on a crash course in finding out whether or not their workforce could work from home or not. About a fortnight into it, we took a call from an office manager who predicted his own redundancy. Do you remember? I think he had about 200 people working under him. He was an office manager and he said, I don't think we're going to come back. Nothing has changed. Everybody is producing the goods on an identical scale to where they were before. If we do come back, it'll be on a fraction of the day-to-day workforce turning up at the office from what went before. He was describing his own redundancy. In fact, I may have misremembered. Maybe it was a little bit later in the conversation, a bit later in the lockdown, and he had already become redundant. So he rang in to explain why the world was changing before our very eyes, but it was changing in a way that was going to render him redundant, and he couldn't. I mean, he didn't want to lose his job, but he couldn't really find fault with the logic because he's looking at the numbers, he's looking at the efficiencies. And the newspapers still seem to regard it as some sort of affront, even to their masculinity or their patriotism. There are many times I read Daily Mail columns and find myself wondering what we need here is a medical diagnosis more than a journalistic one. But often the stuff that baffles me the most is the stuff that involves an absolute inability to conceive of the possibility that the world ever changes for the better. I think if you'd had a Daily Mail column at the time that George Stephenson came up with his rocket, you'd have been absolutely livid about what this was going to mean for horses. Not good enough for you, is it? Is it so woke? Trains are so woke. Steam engines are so woke. What's wrong with a horse? What's wrong with a horse, you big woke snowflake? When the internal combustion engine was invented, they'd have been livid at the death of steam. What do you mean? Why don't you? What's wrong with steam, you big woke snowflake? What do you need an internal combustion engine for? Every single moment of human progress is greeted by a certain type of human being as being a disaster. Because, I don't know, is it an emotional immaturity? Is it an inability to act? No, do you feel safe when things are just the way they are? People go to the office. One of the Daily Mail columnists that got angriest about working from home files his column, or certainly used to file his column routinely, from the west coast of America, from home. But don't let that stand in the way of a full-page fulmination. So it's as if people are frightened by change. Are you frightened by change? Someone comes along and says, it doesn't mean all change is good, but someone comes along and says, we're going to do things differently now. And it actually makes your tummy turn. What? If you're holding yourself together with quite a degree of fragility, then the idea that things can be really, really different are going to shake you to your core. I don't know, I'm overthinking it. Why? Why are British workers enjoying the opportunity? You see what I mean about the language? Only workers in the Philippines are more reluctant to go into the office than those in Britain, researchers found. I'll rewrite it, okay? Only workers in the Philippines are enjoying the freedom to work from home more than those in Britain, researchers found. It's exactly the same story, okay? So here's Rupert Murdoch's version of it. Only workers in the Philippines are more reluctant to go into the office than those in Britain. And here's James O'Brien's. Only workers in the Philippines are enjoying the freedom to work from home more than those in Britain, researchers found. It's exactly the same story. And what we discovered during lockdown when we were doing the why is it all being written about so negatively? Why are the people who brought you Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, actually that's a bit later in the picture, why are all these people who've sold you all the most disastrous things that have happened to this country over the last 10 years now adamant that you shouldn't be working from home? What is motivating them? And one of the answers, if you want to set aside my psychological exploration of the fragility of stability, one of the answers was that quite a lot of the money moves in similar directions. If everybody's working from home and you are a commercial landlord or you are heavily exposed to commercial rents, then this is an absolute disaster for you. I never quite got that. You're still going to go to places. You're still going to go shopping. You're just going to go shopping in different places. And in Britain, I think it's got a lot to do with the length of the commute. So what's it like in Kuwait? Have you ever been to Kuwait? Keith, have you ever been to Kuwait? Begins with the same letter as your name, so perhaps you might have visited. Kuwait Keith, they could call you. Cute. So Kuwait is at the opposite end of the scale. 4.2 days a week, the average member of staff in Kuwait is in the office. Obviously, these are going to be office-based jobs, white-collar-based jobs. So not even 5 days a week there in the country that has returned more to work than any other. But I am going to go out on a limb, not knowing Kuwait intimately or at all, and I'm going to suggest it's probably quite easy to get to and from work in Kuwait. Probably doesn't involve an hour on the Northern Line. Am I right? I must be right. And the countries in which working from home has become more popular will be the countries in which the commute is less pleasant, longer and less salubrious. So we have such concentration on our big cities that the British answer to the question of why are we doing it more here than anywhere else is going to involve the commute, the length and the conditions of the commute more than, I think, anything else. So Let's do it. Let's do the why of it. Why do you think Britain leads the world when it comes from still working from home 5 years after the pandemic began, by one measure, 5 years after the first lockdowns began? Why do you think Britain is doing this more than almost any other country on the planet? That's your theoretical, sociological, even perhaps philosophical question. So everybody can answer that. Okay, why in this country does working from home, despite the extraordinary exertions of right-wing media to both demonize and undermine you, why do we in the United Kingdom spend less time in the office than any other workforce in the world, except the Philippines? Just give me the why of it. Why do you think that is? Okay, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Now, the second bit is a bit more specific. So everyone can answer the first question. I've given you my answer. I think it's all about the unpleasantness of the commute. If I had to spend, and I do the commute in the mornings, I just about get away with it. If I leave early enough, I'll get a seat. But if I was spending, like when I worked in a shop and I was in the heart of rush hour, if I was spending an hour in and an hour out with my face wedged into the armpit of another passenger, then I would probably be much keener on working from home than I currently am. But what is particular to Britain that explains this statistic, all right? And you can come at that from whatever angle you want. But the other thing I want to do, because I don't think we do this enough, how has it changed your life? Like, hand on heart, we don't do this enough. And it might be quite an upbeat conversation, and goodness knows we all need an upbeat conversation at the moment. So a genuine, because all I ever read is slightly boring old men banging on about how bad it is, which completely ignores the statistics. The statistics suggest that this is something that has been embraced and welcomed on a world-beating scale. More people in this country continuing to work a significant part of the week from home than almost any other country on the planet. It speaks of a nimbleness. It speaks of a kind of early adoption that is peculiarly un-British. And I want to know why. Why do you think we, in this country, are spending more time working from home than any other workers in the world? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. All right, 0345 6060 973. And then the specifics of it. So, how has it changed your life? And don't hold back on this. I don't ask questions like this very often. In fact, I don't really ask questions I can't answer very often, which is, again, possibly a character failing. But I can't answer this because I don't work from home. So how has the freedom to spend more time working from home changed your life? I nearly said improved, because if it is a freedom, then it means you're choosing to do it. And if you're choosing to do it, you must prefer it to the alternatives. So how has it actually improved your life? What is the reality that is absolutely ignored by the rhetoric? You wouldn't be allowed to write an article like this for the Times or the Sun or the Mail without turning it into a negative, without driving home the demonisation, without prioritising the pejorative. But for the rest of us, for those of us who live in the real world and recognise that statistically this must mean people like it. Why? How has it improved your life? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11 is the time. Martin suggests, could it be that working from home is a privilege and giving privilege to the lower orders is something that they hate? And by they, he refers to the people I somewhat unflatteringly referred to as old men moaning about everything, which I suppose is a category which I will be arriving in soon, although I may spend a lot of time moaning about everything. I don't currently think of myself as old, although you might. So what is it about this country that explains why so many people are still working from home long after the lockdown ended? I'm getting a bit of a crash course in Kuwaiti and indeed Filipino culture, and they may be anomalies in the context of the conversation that we're having. An awful lot of the workers in Kuwait, where everybody's gone back to the office, will have no rights at all and will be doing so perhaps under something pretty close to duress, whereas in the Philippines, the traffic makes rush hour on the M25 look like a walk in the park. I'm told by someone who lives in Manila that they know people who leave for work at 3:30 in the morning in order to be sure. That might be a slight exaggeration, but it would render both of those countries, at the two extremes, slightly anomalous. So why do we stand out? What is it about this country that makes us stand out? Shelley's in Stamford in Lincolnshire. Shelley, what would you like to say?
Hi, so I'm coming at this from a perspective as a working parent, and I think that the ability to have that flexibility to work from home is particularly important because it gives you not only greater flexibility and reduces those logistical challenges, but it also means that, you know, you've got that improved work-life balance and well-being. There's obviously reduced financial pressure in and around childcare. I can collect my kids at 5:30 instead of 7 o'clock. And I don't think it's wrong as a parent to be a parent but also have a career.
No, nor do I. And the more help we can do on that front, the better. But why would that be more relevant in Britain than it would in other comparable economies, in other comparable countries?
Yeah, I think socio-economically, though, in the UK now, invariably both parents have to work. Invariably, parents aren't living near family, so don't have the support of grandparents or family locally to help sort kids.
Yeah.
So I think I don't think it's fair to compare us to Kuwait.
No, I'm not. I said comparable. I've already shot that for us. I said comparable economies. I'm thinking. I mean, I'll compare us to France or Denmark or Germany or.
Yeah, but France labour laws are quite different in France and Central Europe, right? You know, you've got laws in France that mean that after the hours of 9 to 5, you're not contactable on email, etc.
Yeah, you're right.
I work in financial services. I work in PR and communications. So I'm used to an always-on approach. I'm used to working weekends if needed and evenings. And I want my career, but I also want children.
So this is a brilliant call.
And I should be able to have both.
No, I know you should. And in fact, you're turning, I mean, it's a positive for negative reasons. So the reason why we're embracing it so much is because we don't have the workplace protections that other people have. Our childcare is too expensive. And arguably, we are economically compelled to have two incomes when we're raising children in ways that we wouldn't be in other countries. So those are all bad things. And being able to work from home more is a good answer to three quite big bad problems.
Yeah, but equally, I understand the perspective of the corporates, right, who are saying we need collaboration and face-to-face collaboration is important. And people need to show up when they need to.
Yes.
But you also need to understand that actually we've moved away from people giving their lives to their jobs, and that's okay. And you can have a job and have a family, but big corporates need to kind of start to understand that a bit more. And the government also needs to stop this rhetoric around, like, we've got such an issue with all the big jobs being in the big cities.
Yes.
And forcing people back into the big cities, and this rhetoric around, particularly around working mothers and flexibility, like it's dangerous, and you're cutting out a whole load of people who would be super productive for the workforce if you just enabled them to be able to have a bit of choice and balance and be an adult.
And how can they be bad things? I mean, this is why I like the topic, Shelley. It's why calls like yours are so helpful, because we're both in a way informed by the rhetoric and the negativity of the rhetoric, the idea that you can't do this and you shouldn't have that, and these people are office shy, and that there's something shameful about the fact that we are the worst country in the world for this, or of course the best country in the world for this, depending on what side of bed you got out on this morning. And yet the reality that you describe is one that everyone will recognise. It helps you be a better parent, to put it in pretty simple terms. And while a lot of the issues in play here are specific to parents, because that's the position that you're speaking from, they're also peculiar to Britain. So childcare costs, the length and the cost of the commute, the necessity of two incomes, again, I'd put that in the same bracket as childcare costs, and the paucity of workers' rights in this country. You know, the fact that if you're not in the office, you can actually maybe be a bit more free and end up doing a slightly better job, despite the fact that it is at odds with the prevailing culture in the workplace. Thank you, Shelley. Let's go from Stamford to Birmingham. Ollie's there. Ollie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good. So I was just thinking about this, and I think working from
Everyone,
home...
that's what we want, more thinking. Carry on.
I think working from home really has revolutionised my life in quite a number of different ways.
Yes.
I'm all for it, really. So I was just explaining to your colleague there that I am obviously based in Birmingham, but the last couple of jobs that I've had have been based in London.
Right.
And I think working on a hybrid basis, it just means that you can be a bit more flexible in terms of where you work and where you live, and not having to pay absolutely thousands of pounds a month for transport costs and rent.
Most of us don't have the ability to make meaningful comparisons with other countries, do we? But I wonder whether we are real outliers on those three things, on those three costs: childcare if you're a parent, commuting whether you are or not, and, as you say, property rentals. So you want to work, you're not getting the salary in the city that you need to pay the rent in the city, but you might be able to live quite a nice life 2-3 hours outside the city.
Yeah, well, James, just one other thing. I mean, I was made redundant from a job just before Christmas,
right?
And it's fine now. I'm in another job now, but I was applying for a job in January, and they're another London-based organisation, and they had mentioned that they offered sort of hybrid working, and were going from 2 to 3 days a week in the office in London. And I did the sums, and it would have cost me over £1,000 a month just to get to work, and with the timing as well.
You can't argue with that, can you? Really?
No.
Except that, well, because you know me, I can argue with anyone about anything, Ollie. Except that this is now letting your employer off the hook for giving you a higher salary. So, if I were looking for negatives in the positives, which is my curse, you should be offered a higher salary for that job, but they're not going to offer you the higher salary because you can work from home, and then the shareholders and the boss gets to keep all the cash that they should have been paying by rights to you. And you think you've done well, but you haven't, because you're not paying for your commute.
No, but the salary was good. I mean,
not good enough.
The difference between 2 to 3 days was probably just the other end. Just the other end for me, so I turned that one down.
Fair enough. Why Britain? Why do you think Britain is so far ahead on this, or so far behind, depending on what your perspective is? What would you say it was about this country that makes working from home so much more attractive than it would in other countries?
I think it's probably the expense, and I think it's probably that this country is very sort of London centric or southeast centric.
Yes.
I think Germany, France, they've got a lot. They're a lot
more
better
hubs,
with sort of regional centres, really.
I mean, that's why I mentioned as at the beginning of our conversation that it's none of us are or very few of us are in a position to make really meaningful and deep comparisons. George read an article that says we save on average £5,000 a year working from home. Well, that's the average, because of course Ollie was just positing the possibility of saving £12,000 a year if you're spending £1,000 a month on travel. I wonder whether or not it is to do with things that we actually shouldn't be proud of, like the inflated costs of accommodation, childcare, commuting. All of those things mean that actually for an employer, you're going to work from home? Brilliant. I don't have to give you a pay rise. I don't know. Richard is thinking, this work from home debate links to your first hour, James. It's not a privilege or a freedom. There's more workplace surveillance going on in your home now through cameras and keystroke recognition than when you work from the office. The workplace has been a place of control since the Industrial Revolution, and it's even more surveilled and controlled than it has ever been. So you're describing a form of home detention. My goodness me, talk about looking for the negatives in what initially appeared to be a positive. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What story do you think is on the front page of the Daily Mail today? I'm going to give you a little quiz, all right? So the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, was under fire, apparently, last night for accepting an expensive freebie. Okay, so the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, was under fire for accepting an expensive freebie. Do you think that expensive freebie was A, a Tesla motor car, Is that the correct phrase? Can you call them a motor? Yeah, it's still got a motor, even if it's electric. So A Tesla motor car. Apparently you can't give them away at the moment. So is that the expensive freebie for which the Chancellor of the Exchequer is under fire? Is it B, a free holiday at a home owned by the family of Lord Zach Goldsmith? Or is it C, 2 tickets to a Sabrina Carpenter concert? So what do you think the editor of the Daily Mail considered to be a sufficiently egregious breach of protocol to merit the front page of the entire newspaper? Her budget killed growth. This week she's set to cut 10,000 civil service jobs. But yesterday Rachel Reeves squirmed on TV as she justified taking a free holiday at a Marbella mansion owned by Lord Zach Goldsmith. 2 tickets to a Sabrina Carpenter concert or a brand spanking new Tesla motor car. Which one of those do you think, knowing what you know about what matters in this world, what do you reckon they decided was a big enough story to merit the front page? Couple of concert tickets, fancy new car, or a free holiday at Lord Zach Goldsmith's family's mansion? Let's see whether you can work it out. Back to working from home. Andy is in Reading. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, I'm ringing on behalf of my wife, thank you, James.
Okay.
My wife faced the challenge in her early 30s of battling and going through cancer, particularly bowel cancer. And when she went through that 4 or 5 year journey, part of her identity is as a nurse, as someone that works in the hospital. And she wanted to return to that. Now, as part of having a stoma and being able to perform self-care and being able to learn how to use that as part of her journey back to the workplace, it was extremely stressful. It was really hard going back to work after that time away, the physicality where you have changed, but also just the stress of knowing that you can personally self-care, you can toilet, you can actually use your stoma effectively and have a private space. And her workplace were fantastic, and they did some workplace adaptations which allowed her on certain days to work from home. And the biggest thing is that she could face a day without the stress and anxiety of knowing that she is going to be able to perform those self-care that we all take for granted.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that, and it hasn't impacted in any way on her ability to do the job that she was doing and continues to do.
No, and there's so many different effects that once we realise that stress and that anxiety and having that safe place, and I think it feeds into the conversation about workplace benefits, the disability benefits. You know, if she hadn't have had a supportive employer at that time that helped her to return to work and used home working as part of that, I think there's a fair chance that she might not have been able to do what she's doing now.
Why do you... I mean, this is a very specific case study, isn't it, Andy? But just to put your thinking cap on for a moment, why do you think this country has embraced the freedoms that your wife has enjoyed more than pretty much any other country in the world?
Well, you did say about legislation. In my world, you have to put in fair workplace adaptations to allow somebody to do their job. It's obvious if you are, I don't know, in a wheelchair, that you would need a ramp and you shouldn't be able to have to go up steps. But for my wife, that part of that workplace adaptation and actually having that occupational health service to allow her to say, well, this is what would make a difference to me, and being listened to enabled them to actually take that seriously. And so that was a really positive experience for us. And so it was actually the legislation and the return to work processes.
The woke agenda. The diversity, equity and inclusion you're describing.
Yeah, and then it's sort of spread across our lives. I'm a shift worker. I work in a hospital, and there's times when I'm finishing my shift at 7:30 in the morning. Previous caller talked about 2 parents having to work to get by. And I face sometimes the challenge of getting home and thinking, right, I've got to get back in time to get my daughter to school.
Yes.
And there's the pressure of finishing a shift and thinking, I really hope I don't have patient care that's going to put me under pressure when I leave the hospital, or just overwhelming tiredness. That means I'm going to have to jump in the car and drive home tired and exhausted.
Which is suboptimal.
And knowing that my wife is at home and she can, if necessary, pop my daughter into school has allowed me to not get in the car when I'm exhausted, has allowed me to say,
okay, this patient has care that's going to need to go on beyond my shift, and give that care and that freedom, not just for the patient, but for my personal well-being of who I want to be as well. And this freedom that it's afforded our family has been huge, not just in the practicality, but also taking away the stress and allowing us to be the people we want to be in our workplace.
Thank you, Andy. So, I mean, the more you talk about it, apart from my slightly unhealthy obsession with finding the negatives in the positive, the more you wonder why the media narrative has been allowed to run so negatively on what is, for almost everybody getting in touch with me today, a variety of positives, a variety of improvements to your life. Now, when you boil it down to the peculiarity of Britain, why we in this country are availing ourselves of these opportunities with more alacrity than our peers and counterparts in other countries, things get a bit murkier, because it may be that the costs are lower in other countries, and it may be that the respect from a workplace or the legislation in place to make the workplace more navigable for people, more accessible for people, it may be that we're lagging behind on those things so that working from home becomes more attractive. But I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think we're going to go definitive on the peculiarly British appeal of continuing to work from home. But take that as a challenge. There's a couple of phone lines free, 0345 6060973. I like this from Elise. I can't keep track of what we're supposed to be angry about, James. Are we for reducing the size of the government or against job losses for civil servants? It depends what day of the week it is, Elise. I haven't got the secret memo. But I think on Mondays, you're supposed to be very cross with Rachel Reeves for cutting civil service jobs. But on Tuesdays, you're back to agreeing with Jacob Rees-Mogg that there's a big blob out there stymieing progress and we need to get rid of loads of civil servants. And then on Wednesdays, you're back to wanting to keep... then you want to keep... I'm like you. Anyway, get very cross today about a school in Cambridgeshire that will not be having an Easter service on a day that isn't Easter. That's your instructions on at least one front page today. I mean, how many schools are actually at school on Easter Sunday? Yeah, that's what I thought. But anyway, you're supposed to be getting very cross about that today. Whatever you do, don't ask yourself what the teachings of Jesus would tell us about things like refugees or helping the poor. Focus instead on being furious with a head teacher who has said they're not going to have an Easter service on a day that wouldn't have been Easter anyway. Okay, that's what you need to be angry about today, Elise. You know me, I'm always happy to help. Kat's in Amersham. Kat, what made you pick up the phone?
Hiya. Lots of thoughts, really.
Whoa.
I worked in staffing for many, many years, and for the last 20 or so years, I've been able to work remotely. In answer to your question as to why you think the UK might be an anomaly, obviously, first and foremost, the media oversimplifies most of these things and reduces it.
How dare you? That's
and reduces these topics down to such binary thinking.
What?
Having worked in staffing, I set up a business 8 years ago to advise businesses in the UK on work trends. So one thing that I can say is that demand for flexible and remote working was already on the rise well before the pandemic.
Yes.
And I've got some data points that I could share with you. It was a
massive catalyst, though, wasn't it? It was a huge turbo boost.
It was a massive catalyst, and it was interesting to observe the extent to which companies that have been denying and deflecting the reasons and the ability to work remotely suddenly were able to pivot in a few short weeks. I think the thing that is happening now is quite interesting. You know, actually, hybrid and remote working has afforded people who desperately need it access to be able to provide care and support for their families where the state doesn't do that anymore. If you think about the number of childcare facilities that were forced to close as a result of the lockdowns, and you think about the way in which social care just hasn't recovered for people that are ageing, there's actually, a great
But these are
need
negatives.
to be able to...
These are negatives in the positive in one way, aren't they? If we had brilliant childcare, then maybe people would prefer to be in the office. I don't know.
Yeah, that I guess that is true to some degree, but in equal measure, you kind of there's no one-size-fits-all, is there, anymore? And there hasn't been for a long time. One of the reasons why I suspect we might be an anomaly in this country is because of the size of our knowledge economy.
Yes.
We don't have manufacturing and...
Well, no, because the statistics are about offices, so they're not comparing apples with pears. They're not. You know,
right, okay.
It's not just about random workplaces jobs you couldn't do from home. This is about people whose work is office based, so knowledge based, white collar.
Yeah. So if you're looking at knowledge, the knowledge economy, you know, our knowledge economy in this country is pretty healthy, and you know. Ostensibly, what is knowledge work? It is, as I understand it, to be the trade of ideas, know-how, expertise, and so on. And we've always been quite strong. As long as I've been in the workplace, we've been quite strong as an economy in those areas. The creative industry, I mean, fundamentally, what are we saying? If you've got a high-speed broadband connection, as a key tool of your job, then that
you should be able to do almost anything. I wonder where. I mean, then the question of why on earth the negativity is so great and so widespread kicks in, doesn't it?
So I'm going to give you two reasons that I believe to be the negativity.
Go on.
One is obviously there's a huge amount of money tied up in corporate real estate.
Yeah.
And the other, bluntly, is outdated patriarchal thinking about leadership.
Go on.
Oh, you know, it's a really easy, lazy trope, isn't it, to say that people are unproductive when they're working from home.
Yes.
But actually, if you look at employment survey data and you look at engagement data, you know, engagement in the UK, employee engagement, has circled the drain for many, many years. Actually, in the last, I think, Gallup poll in 2024, we ranked something like 33 out of 38 countries for engagement, and our engagement stands at around 10% in the UK.
Gosh. And
you have to ask yourself why that is. And actually, I think it's a complete disconnect between kind of elitist command and control thinking in executive teams and boards and a complete misunderstanding or lack of desire to understand what modern workers
which leads us back to where we began with this notion. I didn't put it as academically as you, as intelligently as you, but a sort of an incoherent fear of change, which you see in my world, you know, on the world of media commentators and newspaper columnists. They never have to really articulate much beyond, it's bad, it's new, so it's bad. But when you put it in that command and control context or patriarchy, then that's what they're frightened of changing. Any challenge to a status quo which has delivered success and status to somebody who didn't really deserve it, any challenge to that status quo is going to be absolutely terrifying. I like this as well from Stephanie. Thank you, Kat. There are two types of people who object to home working, James. In one, people who do a job where home working isn't possible. I have never really come across that. All I've come across is people who claim to be speaking for workers who can't work from home. People who would, if, for example, let's say a train driver was to take industrial action to improve their terms and conditions, then the kind of person that would talk about that train driver in the most disgusting, obnoxious and insulting of terms, when the dial turns to the working from home debate, suddenly they're big champions of train drivers. Suddenly, won't somebody think of the train drivers? It's, those poor old train drivers, they can't work from home. I've never met a train driver that's got a problem with other people working from home. All I've ever met is a right-wing blowhard pretending to care about train drivers when seeking to attack people who are working from home, which involves taking a day off from attacking the train drivers. But I digress slightly. And the second is the people with a vested interest, which Kat touched upon, getting their rents from office buildings or business owners whose revenues have been affected by fewer daily customers. Nobody else cares, James. Oh, apart from all the haters who will get angry about whatever the Daily Mail tells them to. And where would we be without the haters?
James O'Brien on LBC.
There is almost certainly a German word for the way that your ears prick up when something in the news on even a national level involves your little corner of the country. For example, were Kidderminster ever to appear in a news bulletin, my ears would prick up on quite a violent level. But the same is true of the corners of the capital that I've lived in. And at the moment, I'm very fond of the River Brent. For reasons that I'm sure I don't need to share with you, but waterways running through conurbations have a sort of magical quality that allows you to step out of the quotidian for a while and just absorb some of the peace. They've even introduced beavers higher up the River Brent from where I am, which has been a thing of absolute beauty. I keep meaning to go and have a look, but apparently they're quite hard to identify. So when I was reading an article on a relatively new website that was set up by the former media editor of The Guardian, Jim Waterson, about something pretty gross that I'll share with you in more detail shortly, my ears or eyes pricked up when I saw that the River Brent was affected. But I was already engrossed because it's a story, even in the context of the era of the Feargal, the era of Feargal-Sharkey, when we spend more time talking about the state of our waterways than we have at any other point in living memory, and quite rightly so. This story is absolutely gross, and it was the lead story on last week's London Centric newsletter, which is the media organisation. Well, tell us, Jim Waterson, if you would, first of all, a little bit about London Centric.
Well, London Centric is my attempt to try and do a bit of old-fashioned local journalism and do investigative journalism rather than just churning out lots of pieces. So go in depth, find out things about the capital, but often they've got a bit of national resonance, like this one. And
of course, you could easily have people doing the same sort of stuff in other big cities. It's about, as you say, digging into the stories a little bit further than you can when you're on an algorithmic treadmill demanding that you get levels of engagement. Anyway, we digress. This story is hideous.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We got a pre-lunch slot here, so it's an unfortunate time slot, but it's all about people have heard about the idea of sewage seeping into our rivers, and they think, okay, when it rains, the treatment plant gets overwhelmed and your local water company says they've got no choice but to release a load of sewage.
Yes.
What I hadn't appreciated until I was approached by some people who are working on the Brent, your river, and the Crane, a neighbouring one in London, is that there's this issue of misconnections where people's domestic properties are basically plumbed straight into their local stream and river and are just seeping sewage the whole time. And one of the campaigners I spoke to, he said it was a bit like the difference between a short, sharp shock and a constant poisoning. And it's just a sort of one of those scandals that's probably just been in plain sight for decades, but people are only just wising up to.
Well, thanks to you and the whistleblowers who came to you, because I confess, when I read it the first time, I thought, he's found one flat somewhere where a dodgy plumber has hooked up the toilet to the wrong pipe and it's all been pumped straight into the local river. But of course, one flat will be in a building of 30 flats, and you find more than one building, and suddenly you've got what looks like a massive problem. And to be clear, that's what happens. It's plumbing, either by accident or design, that is pumping waste into the wrong pipe. And the pipe is linked directly to a local river or a local waterway.
Yeah, I mean, in really simple terms, we've all got two sets of sewers and drains outside our house. You've got one for your foul stuff and one for your rainwater that comes out the gutters. And in a lot of blocks of flats, and there's 7 we've identified in this story, we've pictured them, we've named them, we've been to every single one. We've even waded in the outflows on the river to check that they're actually flowing. This is proper muckraking journalism. But I couldn't resist it, I'm sorry. But the work that they've done on the Brent and the Crane to do this is incredible. And what it shows is that across London, probably across the whole country, are blocks of flats where, whether through ignorance or cost cutting, the builders have basically plumbed the foul bit into the bit that flows directly without being treated into the local river.
Would it save money? I mean, is it more likely to be accidental or incompetence as opposed to corruption or
a bit of that, or someone's built an extension and they've just gone for the easiest pipe that they could find, or they've not known what they're doing. But there's also an austerity element here, which is that it's up to the local councils to enforce the standards. For once, it's not the privatised water companies that are to blame here. Are the local councils sending enough people to check on new building work to make sure it's been done right, and then to tell the building owners to fix it? And it's a really, really big problem. I think this might just end up being one of those scandals that you hear about on something like this first, and then in a year's time it's everywhere.
No, that's why you're here. And oddly, I hope you're wrong, because you don't want the rivers and waterways of the country to be routinely receiving unscheduled and unwanted packages of human waste. But obviously, if you're right, then we wanted to get in early on this. Did you encounter a sort of a guru-type figure who has been aware of this for ages and then sort of said, Mr. Waterson, I've been expecting you?
Well, there's a couple of guys, particularly Rob Gray and Ben Morris, who've been working on the rivers of West London, who've done a lot of the legwork on this to bring it to the public's awareness. And they have been doing things called outfall safaris. They literally get in their waders and they go up and down the rivers going, it's a bit suspicious what's coming out of that pipe.
So you'll see, for example, wipes, usually nappies, and because some of the stuff that we produce can dissolve and walk away, and you may be suspicious of the smell or the colour, but some of the stuff that doesn't break down and biodegrade is almost certainly proof that it's come from a toilet.
Unfortunately, as much as the wet wipe creates a fatberg, it's also a quite good tracking device, is what they concluded. So while this might sound quite repulsive...
Like a form of poo sticks.
I mean, literal poo sticks. But and it's funny because we all giggle at this. It is gross. Yes. It's a horrible thing in so many ways. But it's also about taking a bit of responsibility for, is your property polluting the local waterway? You've got that nice stream at the end of the hill near your house. But have you ever known whether or not the builder who built it has actually done the right job in the first place?
And that's why it's such a splendid piece of journalism, because it throws up questions that I wasn't expecting, which would include, what do you do if you live in a place, it's not your fault, and someone comes knocking on your door from London Centric and tells you that your flat, your whole block is I mean, I don't want to pay, I can't afford to pay, I've got enough problem with service charge. So you're not actually going to be greeted with joy by the people whose lives you're minded to improve in a way.
Absolutely. Last week we were going across the capital, knocking on doors and going, look, I'm really sorry, but did you know that your flat's putting raw sewage into the local stream? And you wouldn't be surprised to find out people were not chuffed, and if they did know about it, they're facing potentially thousands or tens of thousands of pounds of bills to put it right. And in a slow way, in a sort of strange way, a bit like with the cladding crisis, a bit like with these ones where there's just not been enforcement on an issue for a very long time, where something's been allowed to build up, you could see this as one of those crises where people suddenly end up with houses that are harder to shift on the open market, or where enforcement isn't happening, or they end up with big bills just because it turns out that pipe hidden in the ground is plugged into the wrong bit of the network.
And where does the buck stop? I mean, you mentioned that councils have a duty of oversight, but it's too late in a way by the time that the wrong pipe has been connected. Whose responsibility is it to undo this damage?
Well, there's a lot of buck passing, but fundamentally it's probably either the freehold owner or the residents of the block of flats or the domestic property. And we've named 7 big blocks of flats containing hundreds of homes. Those are the easy ones to track down because, frankly, there's a lot of people in them. All these domestic properties, all these individual houses are much harder to track down. So I think this is going to turn out. And if, I was listening to you earlier talking about the stories that the Mail chooses to put on its front page. I can assure you, I think that your listeners will be hearing a lot more of this story in the coming months as more and more news outlets realise just how big a scandal this is.
And do we have an indication of how much damage it does compared to, for example, those unavoidable moments of heavy rainfall where the pipes are opened?
I think it's this idea of a constant low-level poisoning. I was wading through a stream called the Silk Stream, which feeds the Brent, which flows to your house, and I'm afraid, whenever you're walking along that river, what I've seen going in at the very top of it is not something you'd really want to look at.
How can people find out more? Just about London Centric in particular, and then of course this story in general.
Well, if they look up London Centric on their favourite web browser or search engine, they'll find it, and this is the top story right now, so they can have a read through it.
And it's congratulations, by the way, on not just this story, but on taking the plunge, if you pardon the pun, and whether you're wearing waders or not, on taking the plunge and trying to rewrite the rules of journalism.
Thanks very much, James. That's very kind of you.
It's really good to see you, Jim. Take care. 12 noon is the time. London Centric, as you'd expect. .media, or just do a search, as Jim says, for London Centric, all one word. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. He also did a lot on Lime bikes. I don't know whether you ride a Lime bike. As you'll be aware, I came off mine the other day and did myself quite a nasty injury. Although, can I tell you something? You promise not to tell anyone. I don't know if the scar is going to be... I've got a little scar on the top left-hand corner of my forehead. I quite like it. I mean, I wish it does make me look a bit dangerous. You're right, Keith. Unfortunately, I told everyone I got it falling off my blooming bike. I should have just kept it quiet and mysterious. and allowed speculation to run rife. Is he doing a little bit of vigilanteism on the side? How has he got? But if you log on to Jim's site, London Centric, you'll see he's done some very important work as well in the investigation of the number of people having accidents while riding on their Lime bikes. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Okay, so here's a conversation that feels a little bit more Friday afternoon perhaps than Monday lunchtime, but it is an aligning of planets that I was not expecting, because there is, as you may already be aware, there are calls today for Sir Keir Starmer to pledge some £250 million of funding for British music education. Ed Sheeran is sort of leading the charge on this, and he describes decades of dismantling music. He wants 1,000 music teachers to be trained, and he wants to see grassroots venues funded, spaces and apprenticeships provided, and a more diverse curriculum. In the letter, Ed Sheeran to the Prime Minister, he claimed that learning to play an instrument is now a luxury that not every child can afford. He pointed out that last year was the first time in more than 20 years where there was no UK global top 10 single or album in the charts. That's pretty bad, right? And as you'd expect, all the big names have joined in. Coldplay, Annie Lennox, Harry Styles, Sir Elton John, Stormzy, and many others. And this coincides with something quite remarkable that happened to me on Saturday. Much more interesting than me falling off my Lime bike. I don't know why. Do you ever do this? You sort of find yourself thinking you should break up the weekend a bit, do something you haven't done before. So I was walking past. Where was I walking past? Just a shop, and in the window of the shop there was an advertisement for a concert at a church near where I live. And I was drawn to it because I've always had classical music in my mind. I listen to quite a lot of it on Spotify and what have you, and I know enough to get maybe one question in 5 right on University Challenge. But to be honest, if you say Beethoven or Mozart or just throw in the occasional Elgar on University Challenge, you've probably got a fairly good chance of getting 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 right anyway. But I keep thinking it's something I want to do more of. I do want to go to more live music. I've been to a bit, and it moves me. I like it a lot. So I saw this poster in the window of a shop near me, and I actually took a picture of it. And I'm going to check what the picture says, actually, so that I get all the details correct of what follows. And I thought, you know what, I'll go to that. That looks absolutely lovely. So it was the Gustav Holst Ensemble, and they were playing a 4 o'clock in the afternoon concert near me in a church. And the other thing that caught my eye were the 2 words, admission free. And so I thought to myself, do you know what, I'm going to go to that. So I logged on, I told Mrs. O'Brien we were going, and 4 o'clock Saturday, let's pop down there and go and see a little bit of classical music. It's a quartet. The ensemble is a quartet, a piano, a viola, a violin and a cello, I think. But don't sue me if I've got that wrong. I was quite near the back by the time I got there. Do you know why I was quite near the back by the time I got there? Went to the wrong church. If I was going to open a church, I would not call it St. Michael's. If I was going to open a church, I would come up with one of those quite rare saints that you never hear of, like Mungo, St. Mungo. When I was a kid and it comes around to confirmation time, and this is probably one for the Catholics, at my school, you have to have a confirmation name, but at my school, we used to try and pick names that were quite left field, like Boniface. And if you're going to, so I went to the wrong church, is what I'm saying. I went to the wrong church, and it meant that by the time I got to the right church, the only seats left free were quite near the back of the church. But I'm there, and they come on and they provide us with a little bit of information about the music that they're playing, which I found absolutely fascinating. And then they start playing, and the first piece that they played was a Mozart quartet. A Mozart piano quartet, and it was lovely. And I do that thing. My old mate used to review plays for the magazine I edited at school, and he always used to include a little note on how many times he's checked his watch. He thought that was a wonderful key to how good a play was. He says, I only checked my watch twice during Hamlet, which is a wonderful indication of what an engrossing production this is. And I know I've got that in the back of my mind. It's 40 years since since he started doing that for my magazine. But I've still got that idea in the back of my mind that you check your watch a lot. I didn't check my watch once. I got all the way to the big round of applause for the end of the Mozart, and then they start on the Brahms. And I'm sitting in a church, not comfortable, pews, not nice cushiony seats. I'm with my wife, which is always a lovely thing. I love doing things with my wife. I know it's very uncool after 25 years of marriage, but I love doing things with my wife, especially things we haven't done before. And sitting in a church in the middle of Chiswick, watching a free concert was a new one for us. At 4:00 on a Saturday afternoon was a new one for us. And something happened to me that has never happened before. I mean, it's almost tricky to put into words because I didn't notice it happening. When you stop thinking about stuff. Happens at football. Happens to me a lot at football. In fact, Jim Waterson, who's just here, is a York City fan, and so we share a passion for non-league football. And if you'd been eavesdropping on the conversation in the studio after we finished talking about sewage, you'd have been aware that you were in the presence of two non-league football aficionados. But it happens at football. It's like you turn the noise off. And regardless of what else is going on in your life, there's a level of focus that you only get in certain places that you don't get anywhere else. So I get it at the football. You get it at a good concert. You get it at a good play. And you get it when you're listening to music. But that is normal. Everybody recognises what I've described, yeah? That thing you do, a video game. You could be playing a video. It's a bit more interactive, or reading a book. But when you manage to step out of what I call the quotidian, well, I say I call it that. It's a blooming Latin word. I didn't invent it. But it's a sort of fancy way of saying day-to-day existence. You step out of it. You step above it. You're on a different plane. But that's not what happened to me on Saturday. Because what happened to me on Saturday was I reached that plane, obviously, although you don't notice when it's happening. You only notice when you start coming down again, don't you? And I'm sitting there, and I noticed, because my cheek itched, so I reach up to deal with an itch on my cheek, and I noticed that my cheeks are covered in tears. There's tears coming down my face. So I'm not crying or sobbing or weeping or anything like that, but my eyes have started leaking. And that it briefly broke the spell in a way, because I thought, crikey, I'm crying. And that has never happened to me before. I've been transported at concerts. I've had all sorts of concerts from dance music artists through to famous rock stars, and I've been in the middle of the crowd jumping up and down, and I've been transported, but I've never had that. I don't know what it was. So I posted about it. This is one of the wonderful things about Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I'm using now, having left Twitter. And 5 years ago, I'd have put that on Twitter in a heartbeat, and it would have been lovely, and we all would have shared stories about what it's like to be in a moment where music takes you to somewhere where you can't go under any other circumstance. But now you posted that on Twitter, goodness me, it would have been an absolute skip fire of angry people going. So on Blue Sky, it was a lovely thing to do. Loads of people got in touch with similar stories. And a lovely respectful regard for the fact that it is rare, but not unique. It happens to lots and lots of people. And you never know when it's going to happen. It's something very specific to this Brahms piece that I was listening to. In fact, it was so specific to Brahms. And if you think I'm exaggerating about how nice it is to be on a social media platform that isn't driven by hate-filled algorithms, then I'll tell you, Anthony, who I became online friends with on the old platform, is a conductor, a violinist, works at the Boston Symphony, went to Juilliard and Yale, but you can make friends with people like that on a decent social media platform. Anthony Princiotti replied to me on Saturday afternoon, and he said, my bet is, and listen, come here a minute, between you and me, I don't know what half of these words mean, all right? But I recognise the numbers. So he says, my bet is that it was during the third movement, the Andante, an exquisite, quietly cathartic E major idyll within a piece written in an often ferocious C minor. could say that in the pub, couldn't you? Oh, what I love about this is that it's a cathartic E major idyll within a piece written in an often ferocious C minor. Brahms told his publisher, "You can put on the title page of the score a picture, namely that of a man with a pistol to his head." And that's how Brahms described this music. All I can tell you is that it flicked a switch inside me that I didn't know existed. And I only noticed when I clocked the fact that there were tears streaming down my cheeks. And it has never happened to me before. And it may never happen to me again. I hope it does. I'd love to think that I've opened a door now that we can sort of stick a wedge under and the door will never close again. I don't want to start sobbing at everything. But when something truly magical happens, that is how my body responded. My body and my mind responded. Not just in feeling that I'd stepped out of the day-to-day, but I'd reached somewhere I'd never been before, somewhere that just, I don't know, that just freed that process. Then I remembered, is there an Al Capone film where he's watching the opera and he starts crying? So it doesn't mean I'm a good person. It doesn't mean that I've got access to some particularly altruistic or compassionate character. I'm pretty sure there's a film in which the actor playing Al Capone starts crying in the box at the opera and then goes off and brains somebody before he goes home for tea. So it's not, but it's proof that music can reach parts that nothing else can reach. And I was probably going to tell you about it today, but I wasn't going to turn it into a topic until I got to work and saw Ed Sheeran leading the call for more music education, leading the call for a reverse of decades of dismantling music. And that, I think, is the perfect opportunity for us to get stuck into this conversation. So how do we do it? Well, the obvious way to do it is to ask, and I don't know, would it be wrong of me to focus on classical music? Because Ed Sheeran's not talking about classical music, he's talking about learning an instrument. So yeah, it would be wrong of me to focus on classical music. But I want to know about music lessons. Okay, I want to be quite strict on this. I want to talk about music lessons. I want to talk about things you learned when you were a child. Or not necessarily when you were a child, but when you knew nothing about music. So you might have come to it a little bit later in life. It's in The Untouchables, I think, and it's Robert De Niro. You're absolutely right. Look at that. What an incredibly erudite bunch we are, eh? It's about music lessons and what we have lost. And crucially, otherwise we haven't got a phone in, what you think you gained. Okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What do you worry you wouldn't have today if the teaching of music in schools hadn't been what it was when you were there? All right? 0345 6060 973. Sue distracted me then when I was trying to be all poetical. She said, "I love you, James," which is, if you're going to criticise me, we've established today that is how you must open your text. She says, "I love you, James, but you are definitely trying to avoid the pothole news." Eleanor's not here today. Elliot's looking after me. But Eleanor, I think the last subject she said, "No, you can't do that," was potholes. And she literally put her foot down and said, "You can't." I like potholes. I think they're a fascinating topic. I'm with Keir Starmer on this. They're not boring at all. But we're not doing potholes today, Sue. At least not yet. We are doing the power of music, but crucially, your introduction to it. Okay, so you might be a music teacher. You might be a professional who, if you hadn't been given a violin, often as part of a local authority practice, a local authority policy, just what did it bring to you? 0345 6060 973. I don't think it would work for me to ask about the time you had an experience like the one I've just described to you, because oddly, magical and unique though it felt, it would just be the same call again and again and again, except the music changes. So it's got to be about music lessons. And what we have lost, 0345 6060 973, and what you think you gained. All right? And what I want you to do is imagine that I had just been listening to, this is all going to get a bit meta now, I'll keep it brief. But imagine I had just been listening to myself, right? Talking about what happened to me listening to Brahms on Saturday. I'll tell you how familiar I am with Brahms. I can't say the word without thinking about Wendy Richard in Are You Being Served, all right? That's my level of Brahms scholarship. That and Mrs. Slocum's Pussy. So we are listening to me talking a moment ago, and we're thinking, what an idiot. Or maybe that's a bit harsh. What a middle-class cliche, something like that. How do you explain to somebody who doesn't understand what I was just wanging on about, why it's got nothing to do with status or class or gender or any of those things? Because you know, and you got it when you were young. So what have we lost, and what did you gain? Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Music education in need of major retune. Ed Sheeran and other artists are telling Keir Starmer. Doesn't bode well, given that other news this morning moots the possibility of £500 million worth of cuts to education in general. And usually, whoever's in power, arts and culture tend to be at the front of the queue. So, why is music education in need of a major retune? And what do I don't want to be rude about anybody yet, but what don't the cynics understand about this subject? Patrick's in Frome in Somerset. Patrick, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James.
Hello,
right, I've learned music for 60 years now. I started the fiddle when I was 5, and I play lots of instruments, and I've taught music. And gosh, I was so excited talking to your producer, right? What music teaches us is pretty much everything that's of value today. And forgive me for my exaggeration. It's about coordination, listening, empathy, teamwork. It's about emotional intelligence. It's all the things, problem solving. It's all the things which, when we look at this awful, terrible, messy world, right, we need. We don't need. I'm going to overmake my point here.
Go on,
we don't need so much overstructured bloody map. Oh no, I'm not supposed to swear. Sorry. We don't need so much of this overstructured test-based education in school. What we need is to teach kids how to cope with the world, how to make the best of the world, and that's what music does.
What if? Using myself as a case study, I can't get a tune out of anything. You know, I could just about manage London's Burning on a recorder. So. That's probably why some of these discoveries have come to me quite late in life. I tried to play the drums. Even that was a bit beyond me. So if you're playing it, I get it. But for a kid sitting in a music class, be a bit like me sitting in an astrophysics class. I mean, what's the point of that?
Yeah, James. I mean, do you know what? I often don't. I never say this, but you're just wrong. Okay. When I taught, no, don't laugh. Right. When I taught music 40-something years ago, and ever since then, I taught every kid practically. Every single person sang, played something, hit something, banged against a window. Right. Learnt rhythm, teamwork, empathy, all those things. And I have never ever met any person who's not been able to do something. And I've spoken to a lot of folks like you. People have this ridiculous thing. They say, oh, I'm tone deaf. It doesn't exist. You know?
I'm always tempted to take that as a challenge. But I was trying to push you more, rather than the feasibility or otherwise of somebody being truly poor at anything musical. But I'm trying to push you more towards what that person gets from not participation, but absorption.
I'm going to push my luck here.
Go on.
So my parallel career was in corporate training, education, educational theory, academia, all that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And what you get to, right, again, in this really complicated world, is that you need to think broadly, creatively. You need to know how to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've taught kids how to listen to Brahms and how to understand the stories he was trying to tell.
Yes.
And the ability to listen to artistic, to musical stories is the same as listening to highly complex problems and picking them to bits.
Is it?
Right? It's the same thing. Neurologically, in terms of psychological process, it's the same, right? So I would put out, and of course, I'm ever so slightly biased,
Yes.
I would put music and arts education right at the centre, not just for the emotional literacy, not just for the Ed Sheeran the number one hits,
Yes.
because that's the way of transforming the economy and the way that we work, and to get the skills we need.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to ask you one final question, if I may. It's something Elliot asked me this morning when I was talking to him about what happened to me on Saturday, and he said, it's a brilliant question, actually. How much of this is context? Could I have had that visceral reaction that I had in a drafty church in Chiswick if I hadn't got my background, if I hadn't listened to some classical music, if I hadn't been to a couple of concerts before, if I hadn't? Do you see what I mean? Can somebody who's never been near any of this ever before wander by accident into a concert hall or a church and be hit with the power I was hit with at 4:30 last Saturday?
It's a tricky question.
It is, isn't it?
Clearly, the background of the individual is very relevant. But to give the example of my dad, he was a working class kid from a state in Bristol, generations of ill education and poverty. Right?
Yes.
He turned up at the old Colston Hall. We're not allowed to call it that anymore, and it changed his life. Completely changed his life. Yeah.
What, one gig?
Yeah.
Just went in and felt himself being taken to places he'd never been to before.
Yeah.
And would not have been able to get to in any other way.
And as a result, myself and my two brothers learnt music.
Yes.
And I've had a 60-year career in it. Well, that's not true. Off and on 60 years.
Yeah. 60-year engagement, there's the word. There's a great book, I'm told. I haven't read it myself, by Armando Iannucci, who, of course, is best known for writing things like The Thick of It and The Death of Stalin, and recently had the Doctor Strangelove. I think it's still on. A frequent collaborator with Steve Coogan, one of the creators of Alan Partridge, and he's written a book called Hear Me Out, which I hadn't. I don't think it's out yet. That's why I haven't read it. How funny would it have been if I'd pretended that I had, and then halfway through that I got to the bit about it's released on the 27th of March. I think it is. I may have. Anyway. That looks really good. Whether it's out yet or not, I haven't read it, and it speaks to some of the stuff that Patrick and I have just touched upon. And I'm going to read you this from Peter, because I think he might like to hear it being read out on the radio. Okay, James, you have just caused tears to stream down my cheeks, not because of hearing music, but because of you saying that after 25 years of marriage, you still love to do things. Special things like going to this recital with your wife. I lost my wife 10 years ago, and for the first time, I now realise how much I miss her presence and company even now. I know what you mean. You mean the quiet moments of missing. Peter, what a lovely message. Take care, mate. It's coming up to 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. For people who want to know, it was Piano Quartet number 3 that got me, having listened to quite a lot of classical music, some of it even live over the years, more so latterly. I was listening to that piece played by the Gustav Holst Ensemble at a free concert in West London at the weekend. That piece that just got me in ways I've never been got before. And it was absolutely wonderful. I like this from Michael, recommending a book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth, which talks about how to access unbridled joy within us. Music is one of the ways we can do that. Interestingly, so is absolute silence, but that book comes heavily recommended by Michael in Belfast. I'm interested in what you got, because if you read Ed Sheeran's letter to the Prime Minister about the importance of learning an instrument, about the importance of learning music, you're left, if your brain works like mine does, you're left wondering what would have happened to Ed Sheeran if he hadn't had music lessons, if he hadn't had an opportunity to learn an instrument. Who would he be today? He'd still be Ed Sheeran, but he wouldn't be Ed Sheeran. Who would you be today if you hadn't had access? And how many children now, if it's true, and I've got no reason to argue, that we've seen decades of dismantling music in our schools, and some of the reports on what Bridget Phillipson has planned with regard to cuts suggest that things might be about to get worse rather than better. Who would you be if it hadn't happened to you? Who would you be if you hadn't been given that gift? You'd still be you, of course you would, but you wouldn't be you, would you? So what have we lost, and what did you gain? 0345 6060 973. And then you've got my mythical listener who thinks this is all a load of old bunkum. And I like that listener. I want to help them see that it isn't. I want to help them reach some of the places that you're describing to me and the sort of place that I went to on Saturday. How do we do that? How do we break through that level of cynicism almost? Or scepticism is a nicer word to use than cynicism. I don't know, but maybe you do. Michelle's in Salisbury. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Good morning, James. Thank you very much for taking my call. Delighted to talk to you, listen to you all the time.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Well, I just wanted to say that basically music has changed my life, and it was my music teacher. I'm 44. I was 8 years old, and I'd finished my PE class early, and we were going to do rehearsals for the Christmas play. She was playing the piano, the keyboard, and she asked me, because I was there first, if I could turn the pages for her of her music book.
Yeah.
So I did that, and we were singing, and she turned around, Mrs. Forward, I'll never forget her. She said, "You've got a lovely singing voice. Why don't you do a solo in the school play?" And I was nervous, and I didn't know that I could sing. And she said, "I tell you what, on the night," she said, "if you nod, I'll know that you want to do the solo chorus. If you don't nod, if you shake your head, then we'll get the whole class to sing it. So you don't have to worry."
What an amazing teacher. So you could make a decision with like moments to spare.
Yes. She and I was dressed as a robin. I'll never forget it.
Pardon?
And I was dressed as a robin because it was a Christmas play.
Who was Batman?
Exactly. I don't know. Anyway, long story short, I did the solo. I still remember the words of this verse that I did. And from there, my whole life changed because I started feeling confident. I got a music teacher, and my music teacher happened to work at the music shop in my local town where I lived, and they had a recording studio at the back. And so I, at the age of 11, recorded a song that he'd written and performed it at my school's music festival, and I won it. And I had to perform in front of hundreds of the kids. And you know what? None of that would have happened if Mrs. Forward hadn't said to me, "You've got a nice singing voice." So
you really think it would have gone undiscovered?
Yeah, 100%.
Because you needed somebody to show that little bit of faith in you that only a teacher could do when you're that age. Because if your grandma said it, you'd think, "Yeah, all right, grandma." You think
exactly. And then I went on I studied saxophone. I write music. Poetry and piano, and then I've had a band at college. You know, it really changed the trajectory of my life and the friends I made. But I think the other point I was going to make just quickly is the audio element, that sense of sound, right? So you can play white noise to babies stop them crying, or put the Hoover on, or whatever. You know, sound has got these penetrative levels in our brains. And the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my whole life, unexpectedly, was when my daughter was born, and it was her first cry. And I have never heard something so beautiful.
And this is part of having a trained ear.
That's right. Yeah. So it's all powerful.
That's lovely.
Just like words.
No, that's lovely. In a couple of sentences, no pressure. The skeptic listening to this, who thinks it's all very well. No offence, James, but it's not for me. What do we say to him?
Well, what you'd say to him is that everybody's stimulated in different ways. Okay, some people aren't stimulated by music. They don't care. They don't want to listen to it. That's fair enough. It's not the only way to have satisfaction. But if you really immerse yourself and think about it, I'm pretty convinced most people can be moved by some sort of music or sound. You know,
it's just the question of finding it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is why access often privileges choice, and it shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right. But for children to be given access to choice so that they can hear lots of different things, they can pick things up. He doesn't have to be an instrument, like Michelle said, just a teacher who heard her voice and said, "You're good." That was never going to happen to me, but I would have benefited, I think, from an earlier introduction to the joys of listening, the joys of absorbing. Thank you, Michelle. Tonya is in Beaconsfield. Tonya, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Tonya.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I'm very nervous.
Oh, well, let me ask you a question then before you... I don't want you to feel nervous. I've got a horrible feeling, Tonya, that some people listening to this might have just turned us off to go and listen to some music instead. I hope not. But now I'm worried about that. Anyway, what did you ring in to tell me?
Anyway, okay, well, I'm ringing actually because of my husband.
Yes.
I lost my husband just coming up for a year ago.
I'm sorry.
And I know that we're all our family, huge fans of yours. We listen to LBC and particularly you all the time. But I know that he would be ringing.
Oh.
He'd heard you talking about it. And he would be ringing, and I just want to tell you a little bit about how music changed his life and our lives.
Yes.
So he he lived on a council estate, and when he was at secondary school, he was offered music lessons to take up the trombone, and he thought to himself, that's great, I can get out of 2 lessons of maths a week if I do that. Very typical of his sort of humour. Anyway, he went on to, I think, get something like 5 grade 8s in different brass instruments. He completely turned his life around getting into music through the people that he met. And he sort of often used to say that, the people that lived around him, lots of them, ended up in prison and got into all sorts of trouble on the streets. And, it just totally turned things around. And when, and it meant we met because of music. So when I was 9, we lived a mile apart, and I wasn't on the council and I was on the sort of the other end. And when I was 9, he was teaching my father and my brother brass instruments, and he was 18, and I actually thought he was really scary back then. But 16 years later, we met purely, by coincidence. Yes. We worked for the same company in London, a music publishing company, and then we were together for 27 years. And none of that would have happened without music. And to his dying day, he was really passionate about empowering people through music. He was so, and he mentored so many young people, and several, very successful professional musicians who were present at his memorial service, credited him for the mentoring that he did.
So he had a sort of evangelical zeal precisely because of the path not taken, because he knew what a difference that early encounter with a trombone had made to his entire life.
Absolutely, and it just informed everything he did, therefore, because he wanted to sort of go on to mentor people, because it had done so much for him in his life. I mean, he just would have taken a completely different course in life, and he went on to be an instrumentalist, a composer, a producer. He wrote shows. I mean, his catalogue of many classical works, and I just mention this because it's rather poignant that in his memorial service, it was a celebration of his life and his music. And we worked on an album together called The Soul Rest Eternal, which was all about bereavement. All the works for cello and orchestra were all inspired by the theme of loss.
Oh, gosh.
And we played a lot of that at his memorial service, and it was... we wrote it in conjunction with the Child Bereavement Charity to raise funds for child. So, I mean, this is just an example of the sort of...
What was the name of the album, Tonya?
The Soul Rest Eternal. And, it's a very beautiful works. But, he would be absolutely astounded that I'm talking to you, because this is so out of catch for me. I'm a really shy person. And he would be absolutely astounded, but I'm doing it because of how I feel about him.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, and that's who I meant, actually. I didn't realise that I was talking about him when I said if it hadn't happened, that early encounter with music, you'd still be you, but you wouldn't be you.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing that inspired me to call was when you were talking about the experience you had with music, because I teach music. That is the thing that I just, when you say music takes you to a different plane, it's not just about being transported. It's a really profound experience if you have that, and it's just the most incredible thing. It's like almost like an out of body.
Exactly.
You're taken beyond yourself, and it's quite extraordinary. And also through the adults that I teach, they say that music has literally changed their life. It's become, it's completely changed them. It's not just about learning technical skills.
It finds something. I mean, it's there to be found. It's there to be released, but it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be otherwise. Thank you, Tonya. Thank you so much. I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn you touched an awful lot of people, including other bereaved people as well with that. And that CD that you referred to, or that work that you referred to, called The Soul Rests Eternal. That's lovely. That's so nice. Thank you. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. I always forget where it's from. I think it's The Great Gatsby, when someone's describing going bankrupt. And what's it like going bankrupt? How do you go bankrupt? And they say something like, first slowly, then quickly. And I wonder whether the collapse of democratic norms, if you like, a form of political, even moral bankruptcy, might look the same in retrospect when you look back at it. First slowly, then quickly. And where would you turn first? Probably to the United States of America to test that theory. But it is to Turkey that we turn now, because tens of thousands of protesters have now taken to the streets after the main rival to the country's president was formally arrested and charged with corruption. He is the mayor of Istanbul, and he was imminently to be selected as the Republican People's Party presidential nominee for elections that aren't due to take place until 2028. It is being seen by many, or reported by many, as proof positive of Erdogan's increasingly breakneck lurch into authoritarianism bordering on dictatorial government. Hannah Lucinda Smith is a reporter based in Istanbul, and I suppose I should begin by asking if any of what I just said strikes you as hyperbole.
I don't think it's hyperbole at all. I mean, I've been based here in Turkey for 12 years. I actually arrived here just before the Gezi Park protests in 2013, which is the last time that we saw these kind of, mass street protests against Erdogan. There was a huge crackdown on those protests, and after that, as you say, Erdogan's democratic backslide really began. We then had that failed coup attempt against him in 2016. That opened the way for a huge crackdown against particularly people working in the state who were dismissed from their jobs, many of them arrested as well. We saw him change the constitution to allow him to gather more powers into his own hands as president. And now, I think really what we're seeing here is a tipping point. I think up until now, we could have described Turkey as competitive authoritarianism. Although it was very, very clear that Erdogan was not playing by fair means. He kept this veneer of having elections and having an opposition. Now what has happened is the first and only real rival to President Erdogan, Ekrem İmamoğlu, who yesterday was not only formally arrested, but also nominated as the opposition's presidential candidate. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. Erdogan has basically taken him out of the race. He's under a political ban now. He's been removed from office in Istanbul. He's in Silivri prison just outside Istanbul, alongside thousands of other opponents of President Erdogan. But I think, the really important thing to say here is while this backslide has accelerated sharply, we're not really seeing any condemnation from European governments. They're keeping very, very quiet. And I think it's no coincidence that Erdogan's picked a moment to do this when Turkey is more kind of vital than ever to the Atlantic Alliance because of what's happening in the US and Donald Trump's kind of pullout from America's role in Europe.
That's fascinating. So it's more to do, it's not a case of where Donald Trump leads, Erdogan will follow. It's more to do with the ecosystem that Donald Trump is creating, allowing Erdogan to do something that he would have wanted to do anyway, but perhaps would have felt unable to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look back at the past few years, Erdogan's been testing the waters on this. And I think back a couple of years when he basically stood in the way of Sweden and Finland joining NATO because he had his own kind of domestic aims. He wanted to drum up some nationalist support in Turkey. He wanted Sweden to change its constitution and send back people wanted in Turkey, people connected with the PKK, a Kurdish separatist organisation here. And it worked for him. There was no comeback for him from that. And he is basically at this point really using Turkey's position and his own position. He's sort of positioned himself as this guy who can mediate between countries like Ukraine and Russia because of the relationships he's built with people like Vladimir Putin. And he's using that as leverage.
So, I mean, looking at the figures, and of course the clampdown, Elon Musk, I think, closing accounts on Twitter or X that are deemed to be unhelpful to the regime, that great self-styled champion of free speech. How far till we reach the junction where one road leads to revolution and the other one leads to de facto dictatorship?
I mean, I think, to be honest, we're already in de facto dictatorship.
Yeah.
We've just passed the 15th, on March the 15th, it was 22 years that Erdogan has been leader of Turkey. First as prime minister, then as president. That doesn't happen in normal democracy. No. And if you look back for the past 10 years, when you look at the reports that are put out by OSCE, by the election observers, they always use this phrase about Turkish elections. They say they're free but not fair. So we've not been in a situation, like a sort of Syria under Assad, where you've got goons eyeing you up in the polling booths. It's not like that. But there is absolutely no fair environment surrounding those elections. There is no free media anymore. Erdogan's taken control of the institutions. We've seen him use the electoral board to cancel election results he doesn't like, Ekrem İmamoğlu's first win. So all the things that you need to have elections are just not there in Turkey, and they haven't been for a long time.
What difference would condemnation from European leaders make, realistically?
I mean, that's a good question. What we've seen in the past is Erdogan very skillfully taking those kind of condemnations, particularly, Angela Merkel used to be quite vocal at some point. Britain's always kept quite quiet. Britain always says, well, we do our diplomacy behind the scenes and that's far more effective. But we used to hear condemnation sort of 10 years ago from European nations. And the problem is that Erdogan was very skillful at taking that condemnation and flipping it round and saying to Turkey, look, they're trying to interfere in our internal affairs and I'm the one who's standing up to them. And that worked quite well for him. But I think that moment's passed. Things are going so badly in Turkey, not just from a democracy standpoint, also from an economic standpoint. And that's what's made these protests spread out, not just in Istanbul, but across the country, even in AKP strongholds. And I think at this point, Turks do want to feel some kind of solidarity. I spoke with İmamoğlu's foreign affairs advisor yesterday, and he said, the silence has been deafening. They were kind of expecting it. But he said, interestingly, the support is coming actually from other mayors in other countries, particularly opposition mayors in places like Hungary and Serbia, other countries which are sort of following the Turkish path. And I think that's really interesting. I think there is a new kind of opposition politics growing in Europe, and it's centred around these kind of opposition stronghold cities.
Final question, and forgive me if it's crass. Is he toppleable, if that's even a word?
It's a good question. I always say never underestimate him. His end has been predicted so many times in the time I've been here, and every time he manages to scrape through. He's an arch pragmatist, he's a gambler, and he's very, very skilled at reading his country. However, just less than 4 months ago, Bashar al-Assad, in the space of 3 weeks, was toppled, and I wouldn't have seen that coming. So I think, never say somebody is untoppable. I think with the protests, we are reaching a tipping point. The protests last night turned really violent at Istanbul City Hall. There was some really harrowing footage of female protesters being beaten, of, protesters who were lying on the ground being kicked by the police, dragged off. There have been a lot of journalists arrested this morning, Turkish journalists. And, Özgür Özel, the leader of İmamoğlu's party, has called on people to keep on coming to the streets. And I was just at City Hall a few hours ago, and already there are protesters gathering there. So I don't think the protests are going to stop. The violence is rising night by night, and I think we are reaching an inflection point where we'll see whether this, turns into something quite serious or whether Erdogan will take a step back.
Thank you, Hannah. Lucinda Smith, live from Istanbul, where, as you hear, the protests are reaching unprecedented levels and show no sign yet of abating. Squeeze in one more call before I hand over to Sheila, if I can, back to the altogether rather more uplifting question of the difference that music makes. Eric is in the Scottish borders. Eric, what would you like to say?
Hi, I would just like to say that when I was 6, I was taught viola.
Oh, yeah.
At school, and
I pronounced it wrong. I called it a viola. It's a viola, and it's an ensemble, not an ensemble. Sorry, carry on, Eric.
Viola, one step down from a violin.
Yes.
And I got a gig with the Edinburgh School's Youth Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And I remember when I was about 5, the music teacher at Modern Primary just got us to tap in time, so at least they could show you the basic rhythm.
Yeah.
And it taught me viola, it taught me how to read music, and ended up playing in front of the Queen Mother at Leith Town Hall in the Edinburgh Schools Orchestra.
Wow.
And we're doing like Handel's Bourrée minuets and all that kind of stuff.
Gosh.
And before I got my gig in the Bay City Rollers, my first band, I went down to buy an amplifier from this local band, and it was sheet music of the Beatles' A Day in the Life. And I just picked up the guitar and started to play it and stuff. And they went, "Oh, could you read that?" And I went, "Well, yeah."
And you pick it up and run away with it. You just glossed over something there. I've got to hand over to Sheila Fogarty now, Eric. I'm just going to check with her. Did he just... No, wait, don't go in it. Did he just say he was in the Bay City Rollers?
I think he did.
Yeah. That was my first thing. And music is a vocation. It's therapy when you play it and you write songs. And it's fantastic what these guys are doing there. I did a thing on Newsbeat in the 90s, having a moan about it. My father was a school janitor. Yes. And they closed the music department and sold up all the instruments.
Oh, wow.
But I was just one voice. So I just wanted to say, that's great. If you've got kids, get them into music. It keeps you out of trouble.
That's beautifully put. You are Eric Faulkner. I claim my £5.
That's all right.
There it is. And you were on Desert Island Discs yesterday. I don't know if you... I think Judy Murray had a Bay City Rollers track on her Desert Island Discs as well. How extraordinary. Well, like I say, you never know who's listening, do you? If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com.
James O'Brien on LBC.